Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. When the room gets quiet, that's a great time to take advantage and get the show going. Look, I just really wanted to say good morning and welcome everybody. It's just great to have over 100 people RSVP for the event today to talk a little bit about important topics in our county. So on behalf of Forward Pinellas Board and the staff here, I wanted to welcome you. There are mayors in the room from St. Petersburg Mayor. Good to have you here this morning, Mayor Kriseman. And I don't know if Mayor Leous is here, and mayors in between the cities, our northernmost city and our southernmost city, or close to our southernmost city. Good to have everybody here this morning. I want to welcome members of the County Commission, my colleagues, and members of the board that we sit on at Forward Pinellas, PSTA, a lot of staff people, some business folks, chambers are in the room, and really wanted to thank staff for getting us set up this way and kind of mixing it up so that we have some good dialogue later this morning. And I know with all of you taking your time here today, it's safe to assume that you all think transportation's important. And clearly it's important for us today, but it's also important for the aspirations of our kids and our grandkids and I guess their kids. So we're here to kind of keep that moving, keep that conversation moving. So whether the job is for, whether it's for job access, tourism access, delivery of goods, senior independence, to name a few motivators, clearly transportation is the means for us to do many things we want to achieve for our family and our community. For the last several years, we've hosted a number of these workshops with our partners around the area, and it's really important to have this conversation and talking about transportation and land use. One of the reasons we're here today is these forums are so critical to helping the planning process, advancing that, and in turn helping us make informed decisions for transportation and keeping this county moving forward. And I think we have some pretty important conversations and decisions to make this year. I think the word timing is always an important factor in whether there's success, whether the success will actually be energized. So whether it's the political leadership at the federal level or more to the point at the state level now and in the next few years, whether it's our business community asserting its leadership, or whether it's the public input that we're receiving in record numbers, or whether it's our own impatience with the years of study and talk, the timing seems right, and thanks to the Star Trek show, to boldly go where the Tampa Bay region has not gone before. Furthermore, with so much transportation and yes, transit activity happening throughout our county and region right now, such as the I-275 corridor improvements, the potential of the Brightline high-speed rail to connect South Florida, Orlando, and then hopefully Tampa Bay, and many other small projects and large projects that we have in each of our communities. It's important that we embrace these opportunities and we invest wisely. So another reason we're here today is to crystallize and energize our vision for transportation and transit in Pinellas County and the region, review all of our current funding for both, and begin identifying if or how we repurpose those funds, or in fact, if we have to consider other new sources of funds. Our residents, in fact, demand that we embrace opportunities for and invest wisely in transportation systems to support the economic growth, opportunity, and livability that we have, and we and they expect it. We have talked about the importance of timing and taking advantage of energy in the area. Even with that, there's never a perfect time to talk about transportation funding, but it's necessary conversation, especially now. This year, we'll be adopting a new long-range transportation plan known as Advantage Pinellas, the first plan to align land use and transportation since the merger of the Pinellas Planning Council and the MPO. As Forward Pinellas, we did that 5 years ago. The plan this time, as they say, is not your grandfather's long-term master plan, but rather a living, breathing, exciting direction laid out for all to see and to use for transportation efforts ahead. I know the planners would say that it's always that way, but I do think we have an opportunity now to make it really useful in our everyday lives. A key part of that plan is deciding which transportation projects to make a priority based on the funding we have in place today and through the horizon year of 2045. Another part of the plan will focus on the investments we need to make to achieve our goals for a prosperous county and region with opportunity and safety for everyone. Somewhere in all of these plans, there needs to reflect the growing energy, excitement for a vision that captures the imagination of everyone today and for those following us in the decades ahead. Any plan, however, is only as good as the support as we get from the broad group of residents, businesses, and other stakeholders, and the commitment to seeing it carried forward over time. Based on our conversation with the public, through various surveys, small groups, and individual discussions, another reason for our being here today is, frankly, to step up our conversation and our direction in an effort to help shape how we move our county, individual communities, and the region forward. We will be receiving a presentation on short and long-term recommendations for how we plan, coordinate, and reach decisions for transportation at the regional level. As an example, many groups in the region and in Pinellas County have already prioritized I-275 and State Road 60 exchange as the #1 project in the region for FDOT funding, and it's not even in Pinellas County. So there is almost as many partners in the Tampa Bay region, in the Tampa Bay area for the region, as there are in this room for Pinellas County. I think the residents, tourists, and businesses of the region want their local transportation needs met without question, but I think within the context of a broader regional mobility solution. The idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, I think, starts with each of our neighborhoods and our cities and our county, but it also applies to the region. Everyone, including our partners from Hillsborough County, must be at the table for the ultimate success. After a year-long study of our region and best practices from other regions, the project team from Stantec and USF's Center for Urban Transportation, Qatar, will take some time after lunch to present those recommendations for discussion and feedback. So today is about hearing from you and engaging in a constructive dialogue about our future. As we convene, I firmly believe that we need to continue crystallizing and energizing our vision for transportation and transit for us and for our kids and their kids. It is only with that engaging, clear-cut, imaginative, exciting vision that we will be able to move our conversations forward with energy and purpose. Probably more importantly, that we will be able to engage the public's thoughts and dreams to get their buy-in. Are we there yet? Maybe not, but I think we're getting closer. And leading up to this morning, I've been hearing a lot of good, exciting ideas from folks. And I hope that those conversations and those ideas are brought forward in our table breakouts today. Again, I just really wanted to thank you for being here and welcome this morning. I want to also now take the opportunity to introduce my colleague, St. Pete Council member and Vice Chair of our Forward Pinellas. I've had the privilege of working with her at PSTA, Forward Pinellas, our regional group, the TMA, and our Tampa Bay Water Group. You must be tired of working with me. I enjoy working with you, and I'm so impressed with her dedication to our residents, her hard work, and truly her insightful comments. So please help me welcome Darden Rice.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, good morning. If you are here to talk about how improving transportation and transit makes our community better, you are in the right place. If you are here to get ready to get down to brass tacks to talk about creating local funding sources for transit and transportation, you are in the right place. We have a great agenda today. Everyone has your agenda in front of you. It's going to be a good day for one-on-one and group-wide discussions. And the purpose of today is to foster the dialogue and direction, not necessarily come out of here with a specific action, but to really kind of whittle down a better direction that we want to head in as a county and as a region. As we talk today about the many facets that go into transportation and how it links to other parts of our community, let's keep a couple of things in mind. I think all of us realize, whatever our political stripes, whether we represent a county or a city, there's nothing more foundational to economic development, job creation, and wage growth than a strong transportation and transit system. Broad economic prosperity depends on good transportation and accessibility to transportation for everyone. After we adjust for inflation, wages in this area have declined or stagnated for the bottom half of our county's workers for the last 3 decades. We know that better transportation options will result in higher wages. We have the opportunity to make equity and social inclusion be the hallmarks of our decision-making process. There's more statistics we're not proud of. Unemployment rates are the highest for Black workers and lowest for white workers in the county. 10% of Black adults aged 25 to 64 are unemployed, and those who identify as mixed race or other is the second highest unemployment rate at 8%. In 2016, the child poverty rate for Black children was 43%, nearly double the county average. So we can do a lot better, and transportation is a key to addressing these inequities and social inclusion. Resiliency is also something important to talk about. As Commissioner Janet Long will tell you, the Tampa Bay area is #1 on the urban list of #1 of a worldwide list of urban areas most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, and that's with sea level rise and increased storms. That's the kind of list that we don't want to be on. We have the opportunity to build transit, build roads, and build bridges in a way that helps strengthen our community so that we can prosper through those times where, whether it's man-made or Mother Nature, we can get through disasters. Lastly, I think we all know and can appreciate how transportation links to affordable housing. And transportation that provides fast, frequent, and reliable access to jobs and education is essential to better housing affordability. High rent burden is a crisis in this county. Several communities and the majority of our renter households are what we call cost burdened, and over 60% of their income goes towards housing. Transportation that connects people to better paying jobs is one way to address our housing crisis. So those are all some of the big issues that we have to face, and things that I know that we all have the courage and commitment to tackle as we talk about transportation and funding for transit today. Finally, we're on the eve of a national holiday with the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. And this may not be one of Dr. King's most memorable quotes, but it's certainly a quote really apropos for today. And that quote is, "A leader is not a searcher for consensus, but a molder of consensus." So thank you very much for being here today. And we're going to bring up our Executive Director of Forward Pinellas, Whit Blanton, who's going to go over a little bit more of our agenda and what we're discussing today. I just want to say that one thing that we have to be so fortunate for in this county is that we have some of the best planning staff from our MPO, from our county, from our respective cities to work with anywhere. And we're really lucky to have this great team led by Whit Blanton, led by Brad Miller, and led by the transportation and planning departments of our many cities sitting here today. So together, I know we can get this done. Thank you.
And I would be remiss if I didn't introduce the new kid on the block. We, last year, under the leadership of Commissioner Welch, hired a new county administrator. So I just really wanted to everybody get a chance to meet Barry Burton. Barry, if you'd stand up, welcome him to. And the man gets around, so don't be shy about asking him to come to a community or to your city or to any organization you have. He's really been doing a great job getting out and meeting folks. So, and with that, and before Whit gets us started here, I'd like if you all stand, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance and get started. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Well, good morning. Thanks everybody for being here today. I'm just going to get things started a little bit. We've got a lot of different things to do. The main thing, though, is to hear from you and get you all working together so that we want a really good dialogue and some clear direction that we can take back from this meeting. I'm going to start it off by introducing Hillary Lehman of our staff. Hillary is going to lead you through your first interactive polling activity. And this is really just to kind of gauge where you are this morning, and then we'll revisit that a little bit later today.
Good morning, everyone. So this poll that you'll be doing is all about what our transportation needs are and how we can fill those gaps with funding. So this is not uncomplicated, much like transportation funding and coordination. So some housekeeping notes before we get started. There are paper copies of this poll on the table. And if you're an elected official, we need you to fill that out for sunshine law purposes, in addition to using the clickers. And if you're not an elected official, you are still welcome to fill out the paper copy, but you're not required to. So you're going to keep that sheet all morning because after you've heard the presentations and had your small group discussions, we're going to do the same poll again to see if anything changes. And that's on the back of the sheet. You'll notice that some of these questions have many answers to choose from, but today we're asking you to only pick one. And we know that's hard, but in reality, when it comes to funding transportation projects, that's what we often have to do, pick one or two best options out of many that we might like to choose. So let's get started when it comes up on the screen. And the clicker instructions, you're going to click the number of the answer that you would like to choose. If you decide you'd like to change your answer, you can change it because the answer that's going to be recorded for you is the last number that you click. So our first question is, if tomorrow we had new money to spend on transportation, what would you spend it on? Number 1, widening roads. Number 2, rail. Number 3, better bus system. Number 4, trails. Number 5, safer streets. Number 6, sidewalk network. Number 7, signal technology. Number 8, transportation network adaptation or resiliency. And number 9, other. And if you do choose other, please elaborate on your sheet of paper as to what that might be. So 10-second warning. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it looks like rail is the big winner here. So let's move on to question number 2. So what area in our transportation system do you feel right now is most adequately funded? Number 1 is roadways. Number 2 is bus network. Number 3 is premium transit, and that's rail, BRT, etc. Number 4 is trails. Number 5 is sidewalk network. And number 6 is signal technology. So 10-second warning. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you all. Looks like roadways by far there. So question 3. And this is a long one, so I'm going to explain a little bit. Which of these funding sources do you most prefer? And that's really about for new transportation projects that we might like to fund, which of these funding sources would you prefer to use? 1 is tolling, 2 is gas tax, 3 is special district fees, 4 is sales tax, 5 is developer fees, 6 is public-private partnerships, 7 is assessments, 8 is tax increment financing, and 9 is general revenue. Okay, 10-second warning. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And this one looks a little bit more split among gas tax and sales tax. So moving on to question 4. Do you think it is most important to fund projects, 1, in our local communities and neighborhoods, 2, that improve county-wide connections, or 3, that connect our region? Okay, 10-second warning. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So, again, a little bit split between 2 and 3. And we'll move on to our last question, which is kind of similar to question 1. Think back to question 1, which asked about what we would spend money on tomorrow if we had it for our immediate needs. Let's think ahead. In 2045, what would you like to be spending transportation money on? And these are the same options as question 1, so remember to mark down on your sheet if you select other. So 1, widening roads, 2, rail, 3, better bus system, 4, trails, 5, safer streets, 6, sidewalk network, 7, signal technology, 8, transportation network adaptation / resiliency, or 9, other. 10-second warning. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And here, transportation network adaptation and resiliency are the big winner. So that's our last question. Thank you all for participating, and I will see you later this morning, and we'll do this again.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is just try to set a little bit of context for your group discussions that we're going to have. So I'm going to start with a presentation to provide an overview of what we're doing and where we are in that process. And it'll be followed by a presentation from the county staff about the county's transportation situation, and then followed that by Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority and their presentation. So we can get mine started. There we go. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of context about transportation. And today, what we really want from you is some guidance. We're going to start with seeking a little bit of clarity on your preferences for how we improve mobility and how we look at our associated funding needs for our county and all of our communities. We'll also want to have a good understanding of the potential funding sources, some of the opportunities, and some of the constraints, because transportation funding is not always fungible. It can't always go from one pot to another, and certain funding sources are limited in what they can do. We need your guidance on a transportation funding strategy for Pinellas County that we need to develop further. And so we're not making any final decisions today. This is just a workshop. It's a start of a conversation, but we hope that the guidance we get from you today is something that we can take back and work with city, county, PSTA, and other partners to figure out how do we move this county forward as we adopt our long-range transportation plan later this year. And then finally this afternoon, we're going to explore some actions that are being recommended about how we move our region forward collectively. So I'm going to start with just introducing Advantage Pinellas. And this is a plan that we're working on in partnership with PSTA and really the counties and the county and the cities. But it's an aligned strategy. It's more than just a brand identity to improve mobility and support redevelopment. And it's combining our 25-year look ahead, our long-range transportation plan, with a more of a short-term community bus plan that PSTA develops. Keeping those integrated and aligned is really important so that we know what we're working toward and we're working toward it together. It is the first long-range plan, as Commissioner Eggers mentioned, since we merged the Pinellas Planning Council and the MPO to create Forward Pinellas. We have a countywide land use plan that provides the backdrop, and really the transportation plan is the capital improvement program of how we achieve our land use vision for the county. And the goal is to look at how we focus redevelopment through our core transit corridors and maybe where stations are located, and so that we can give clear mission and guidance to our local governments and what we expect from them, and how does that align with our transportation dollars. So why did we call it Advantage Pinellas? I think we have some wonderful advantages in this community. We are a diverse and growing economy. Manufacturing is the second greatest number of jobs in the whole state in our county after Miami-Dade. Not everybody knows that. We have a lot of small businesses in Pinellas County, so we have a great economy that's growing. We have multiple distinctive downtowns and districts, all with a strong sense of identity. Whether you're in Tarpon or Gulfport or on the beaches, you care about your home, and people are really proud about their neighborhoods and their communities. And we know about our outstanding beaches, but we have the best park system in Florida, and we have an outstanding trail network in Pinellas County. We have great proximity of neighborhoods to all the destinations that people want. You don't have to drive too far to go to the grocery store. You can walk to places. So we have a compact county, and we need to take advantage of the neighborhoods and all the cities that we have here. And then we have opportunities in this county for quality redevelopment throughout our county. Certain corridors like US 19, our gateway area, many opportunities for redevelopment. The challenge we have is connecting all that, connecting our cities, connecting our county, and then connecting our region. As I mentioned, we have a strong framework for how we plan for transportation, and that is a land use plan. We have a countywide land use plan that was adopted in 2015, and it built upon the framework called Pinellas by Design, which was developed back in 2006, 2007 era. And where in that Pinellas by Design, we recognize that Pinellas County's economic future depends on planned redevelopment. Not a lot of greenfields left in Pinellas County. And that's necessary to improve our quality of life through better accessibility, to channel growth into identified centers, corridors, and districts, all while preserving and enhancing existing neighborhoods. We're not going to change neighborhoods that are established, but we have opportunities of where change can occur and should occur. As we hold up a mirror to Pinellas County, and that's really our role at Forward Pinellas, and what's strong, what's weak, where we need areas of improvement, we have built a strong thoroughfare roadway network since really the 1980s. Bayside Bridge, McMullen Booth Road, Belcher Road, County Road 296, a lot of examples throughout the county. And we have a strong partner in the Florida Department of Transportation. Let's give a shout out for finally completing Ulmerton Road. And we've got more projects coming. We've got I-275 with managed lanes and lane continuity improvements, Howard Franklin Bridge. And we've trusted Pinellas voters to tell us what we should be doing. And since the 1990s, we've spent almost $1 billion, $880 million on penny for Pinellas money for roadway improvements. So we've done our part. We've built a good roadway network. We've also committed dollars to an intelligent transportation system that leads the state, an advanced traffic management system that is state-of-the-art. And there's more we can do with that, but that's an investment that was made 10 or 15 years ago, and it continues to grow and it continues to be valuable. We've also done a great job of building a great trail network here in Pinellas County. Within a few years, maybe 5, maybe 6 years, hopefully we will be completing our 75-mile loop around Pinellas County. There's really just a few more segments left, and we've got a number of community trails that are east-west connections to that grandfather trail around the county that will provide a greater level of connectivity. There's not a county in the state that can say that they've done as much for trails as we have. But again, holding that mirror up to our county is, it's obvious that we've had a lack of transit investment. The number of routes, this is a map from the mid-90s, has stayed about the same, about 42 routes. With a few exceptions, the frequency of our bus route network has not increased significantly. The number of trips, though, has grown dramatically, a 63% increase since the mid-90s, and that's because we've added well over 100,000 residents since the mid-90s to today, to where we're almost 1 million population. The transit service, though, is still focused on weekdays that ends at about 6 o'clock on a lot of our routes, and not weekends, and daytime service. And this is a map of essentially what it looks like today, and even those routes across to Hillsborough County were around in the 1990s, and their frequency hasn't really improved. Pinellas County is in a unique situation because housing is expensive in our county, and we're not producing a lot new housing product out there. But the value for what is affordable is generally about 45% of your household income should be spent on housing and transportation. And if you look at this chart, Pinellas is not alone. It's Hillsborough, it's Pasco as well, but we're pushing 60% of the average household spending their income on transportation and housing. And in places like Safety Harbor, it's almost 70%. In Trinity, it's 76%. Wesley Chapel, 66%. Largo is centrally located. It has more affordable housing options, so it's about 51%. So it's closer to where we ought to be, but still a little high. So this is something that we can directly affect through linking housing strategies and transportation strategies. The Tampa Bay Partnership has looked at some of our indicators at the regional level, and one of the things they've looked at, and it's hard to read, but transit ridership per capita, that red bar down at the bottom is where we are in Tampa Bay. That's the whole region. We'd like to be higher on that bar. We'd like to get more people working and more people accessing destinations through a variety of options and not just having to drive everywhere. And you all know that the All for Transportation referendum passed this past November in Hillsborough County. That generates about $280 million in revenue across the Bay. And they're spending it on a combination of things because they are really far behind in just basic maintenance and just getting good transportation networks built in that county. I will say we've done a much better job of keeping up to date on our transportation needs over time than Hillsborough County, but kudos to them for stepping forward and beginning to build out of that hole that they have. And a commitment of local resources. If you look at this map, the yellow coloring are the counties that surround Hillsborough and Pinellas County that have all increased their gas tax to the maximum allowed by state law, 12 cents. So again, it's just one option, but what's increasingly important is that you have to have skin in the game. You have to have the ability to match dollars with state and federal revenues if you want to bring those dollars into your county. And the question today is, how do we want to begin bringing more dollars from the state and federal sources to grow our pie in Pinellas County? And investing in transit has a strong return on investment. I'm not going to read all these in great detail because Councilmember Rice covered some of this, but when you have a 10% expansion in transit service, the annual wage of workers increases, depending on the area you're in, from $53 to almost $200. And transportation throughout the country is where job growth happens. When you have good transit service, that's where jobs tend to locate. Property values tend to outperform areas that have good transit service. Better job accessibility significantly decreases unemployment duration. So if you're laid off or you have to change jobs, you're likely to get back on your feet quicker if you have good transit service. And when you spend money on public transportation, you actually get more return on that spending than you do for spending on other kinds of transportation. We took a trip last November, many of our county commissioners, PSTA board members, Ford Pinellas board members, to Indianapolis. And we went to Indy because it's a good Midwestern city in a conservative state that chose to invest in transportation. We wanted to learn why and what their rationale was. And we learned that in addition to the arguments for why they need to just have good transit service because it's necessary to retain workers and grow the ability for people who don't even have a high school education to get gainful employment, that they advanced a well-connected bus system throughout their metro area, and they also built 3 rapid transit lines, or are building 3 rapid transit lines to connect people to jobs, primarily lower income areas to jobs. This is the Marion County Transit Plan. They went to the state legislature, and the legislature authorized them to pass an income tax. We can't do that here in Florida, but that was a tough vote that they had to take. And you can see the messages here: shorter waits, longer hours, later hours, easier transfers every route every day, and 3 rapid transit lines. The red line that we toured is under construction. And they moved their needle from 86th in the US on transit funding, and they're going to be at 64th or 65th. And we're right now at about 70th. And this is how they measure. So before and after, 10% of their population had access to frequent service. It'll be 35% with the completion of this funding source in 2021. Almost 50% of jobs in Indianapolis have access to frequent service. And low-income households went from 16 to 51% access, and minority households from 14% to 45%. That is how you lift people out of poverty. And here in Pinellas County, bringing it closer to home, transit access increases equity. The University of South Florida found that transit availability, or the lack thereof, is a primary driver of the poverty rate throughout Tampa Bay. It is an actionable way that we have to decrease poverty. And all those magenta, dark colors on that map are places where 15 or 20% or more of our households are below the poverty level. And here, rent burden households, Councilmember Rice mentioned that. Look at all the areas that have 50 to 60% of their income being spent on rent. And then households without a vehicle, again, mapping that throughout the county. It's also a safety issue. You may have seen a story by the Tampa Bay Times recently that looked at where all the crashes are occurring. 9 of the top 12 or 13 intersections are in Pinellas County, where we have most of our pedestrian and bicycle crashes. And we've mapped those against the areas that are low income, and they are really concentrated in low income areas where we don't have lighting, where we have big intersections, and people have to walk, and we don't have late night transit service, so they're having to walk in the dark to a lot of their destinations. Finally, I'd be remiss if I don't talk about our regional connections. The Tampa Bay Area Regional Transit Authority, and I see David Green here in the room today, they are advancing an I-275 express bus plan that would link St. Pete, downtown Tampa, Wesley Chapel, USF, the airport. We will need eventually to find a way to commit some resources to support the ongoing operations of that, at least in Pinellas County. So we need to find a way to do that. And as we've talked about Advantage Pinellas and working in partnership with PSTA, we've laid out a 5-point plan that I'd like you to consider today. How do we define those premium transit corridors where we have express bus or bus rapid transit or transit signal priority? Where should those be in Pinellas County? And how do we work with our local government partners to ensure that there's a mixed-use redevelopment plan, a housing affordability strategy, a complete streets connection plan for each one of those corridors? But in order to advance any kind of improved transit service in our county, we're going to have to figure out how do we have discretionary or dedicated funding to operate that service. And then it's our job as the MPO, if we want federal and state funding to be part of the equation, we need to put them on a priority list. And we will not put a transit project on the priority list if we don't have the land use commitment and if we don't have the funding commitment to operate it. And then finally, we have to ensure a clarity of roles and responsibilities between city, county, PSTA, the Florida Department of Transportation, and TBARDA. So we lay this out here. Here are some options that we can begin thinking about today. And then we went to our citizens and we've asked them, what have we heard? And we've had numerous discussions. First, the County Values Survey that's done just about every year has looked at what people expect. And we've broken it down by north, mid, south, and the beaches in Pinellas County. And we've highlighted in blue just about every one of those areas has availability of public transit as a priority of something people would like to see. You don't see it as much in the south because we have pretty good transit service in South County, but we don't have it really much everywhere else. The It's Time Tampa Bay survey, Transportation, Innovation, Mobility for Everyone, that was a regional survey, over 9,000 responses. We looked at 3 different scenarios. The one that ranked highest in all 3 counties was the transit-focused scenario. And it ranked highest in Pinellas County over Pasco and over Hillsborough. The highway-focused scenario, which ranked lowest in all 3 counties, ranked even lower in Pinellas County. And then we've done a statistically valid survey of all Pinellas County residents. What are the biggest barriers to transit? Reliability, frequency, and efficiency of service. And it's interesting, 54% of Pinellas County residents would be willing to take transit if service was better. I know that's a big if. 41% would be willing to pay more for frequent, reliable service. And interestingly, only 6% said it's the comfort at the bus stop. People want a safe and efficient transportation system for everybody, and that's roads, that's everything. 70% believe timing our traffic signals is a top priority, along with maintenance. 57% of our residents would be willing to exchange lower speeds on our roadways for safer streets. And 90%, everybody loves technology, would like to see us investing more in technology to improve traffic flow. And people want easy access to destinations. The ideal neighborhood by 70% of our residents is being nearby shops and commercial areas and destinations. People also want regional access to access to regional destinations. Over half of our residents say they want that, and then 85% believe frequent, reliable transit improves the economy. And just a few words in their own voices. I would love to take the buses to places, but they're not quite good enough right now, or traffic is not bad enough right now so that it's not a good value proposition. I would pay more than what I pay for driving if I can sit back and relax and not worry about it. There's just not enough space to build an efficient transportation system, move as many cars as are out there. And I love this one. A solution is not just one package, it's a bunch of solutions to get to the ultimate. Our residents are smart. The general public is smart. We learn from them all the time, so I think these are really helpful. So today, I'm going to turn it over to our partners, I believe the county. Ken Jacobs is going to come up and make a presentation. Then we'll turn it over after PSTA to some small group discussions and get you talking amongst yourselves, and then we'll have a panel discussion after lunch, and then we'll talk about our regional coordination. Okay?
Thank you, Whit. My name's Ken Jacobs. I'm the Public Works Transportation Division Director. And to help frame your discussions this afternoon or later this morning, Whit wanted us to kind of go over the ins and outs of some of the revenue sources. And I'll be talking today about what we call the local option fuel tax, or commonly referred to as the gas tax. How we build that in Pinellas County, how it's expended, and some projections on that revenue stream into the future. I'm not sure if everybody's seen this, but this is something that's prevalent in the county. This is a survey that's done every year by the county. It asks the public what they expect out of the services provided by Pinellas County and what's their actual experience. One of the biggest gaps between expectation and experience is traffic flow on major roads. I highlighted several others that we expend gas tax dollars on to improve and keep up with. That's safe pedestrian travel, quality of public infrastructure, and safe travel for bicycles. So how do we pay for transportation in Pinellas County? There's distinct pots of money, and we basically have two real pots of money that are used for transportation expenses. The penny for Pinellas is what we use for our major infrastructure improvements. It can be used for capital improvements. It can't be used for operation and maintenance. So it's one of those things where Whit was saying not all pots of money can be used interchangeably. We use it to design and construct our long-range, our roadway projects, intersection improvement projects, larger rehabilitation projects for our infrastructure. And so the penny for Pinellas is one of the shared resources with all the municipalities based on the interlocal agreement that we have in place. The Transportation Trust Fund is where all the gas tax that's collected by the county goes into this fund. We call it the Transportation Trust Fund, and I'll kind of guide you through how it's built in the next slide or two. But basically the use is for operation and maintenance of the roadway network. And it can be used for capital projects. We do transfer some of the gas tax funds to fund the ATMS capital side. implementation of the traffic system. So we can move it over to capital as needed. We're currently collecting 10 cents on a gallon of gas in Pinellas. 6 cents of that is shared with the other municipalities through interlocal agreements. This is how the Transportation Trust Fund is put together. There's 3 cents that we get from the state. That's called there's 2 different ones, constitutional, and then there's another one that's a county gas tax. So that ends up being 3 cents. There's the local option gas tax that everybody's familiar with. We currently collect 6 cents of that right now. It's shared with the cities, and it's split 60-40 between the county and the cities. We do collect one called the 9th cent fuel tax, and it's the one that's dedicated to the traffic system that was implemented in 2007, and it's a countywide gas tax, and so it's not shared. And the red box that you see on the side is that has the red X. That would represent the addition. There's within the authority of the county, they can collect up to 12 cents, which Whit mentioned. We're currently not collecting 5 of those potential pennies. Other revenue sources that build that transportation trust fund that we talk about, we collect maintenance dollars for contracts for signal maintenance. We get reimbursed from the DOT for street light and traffic signal maintenance. We have insurance reimbursements. If somebody runs over our equipment, it goes into that fund. And the Transportation Trust Fund reserves, we have a balance, and interest comes from that. So just as a representative number, the total of all these sources for projected in FY19 would be about $32.8 million. So what's that used for? Basically, we use it for anything that has to do with operation maintenance of the roadway network. So roadway maintenance, your potholes, broken curb and gutter, sidewalk repair maintenance, bridge maintenance and inspections, right-of-way maintenance, which is mowing, tree trimming, things like that. It's also used for clearing drainage and stormwater facility maintenance that's associated with the roadway. It also pays for all the traffic engineering and operations, traffic signal operations, traffic control signs and markings, the ATMS ITS system that we've talked about. All that represents about $37 million, and the chart that you see off to the right is how that's divvied up on a per activity basis. So you can see right-of-way maintenance, for example, is about 18% of that total. Traffic signals about 17%. This is the forecast that comes from OMB on an annual basis, and this is the forecast for the Transportation Trust Fund. Currently, it's not in balance, which means we're actually spending more than the revenue, spending more on our expenses than the revenue that we're bringing in from the different sources. Gas tax revenue is pretty flat, obviously with the increase in fuel efficient cars and alternate fuel sources. We don't see the gas tax will have a increase in revenue dollars on an annual basis, and it's really not what in the transportation field we say is a sustainable funding source to pay for operation and maintenance of the roadways. Basically what this chart shows is the green line is our revenue sources, the red line is our expenditures to maintain the current level of service for operation and maintenance that we have right now in the county. Obviously the expenses are climbing at a much higher rate than our revenue source. At this rate, the reserves will be depleted in FY22. Which means at some point we will have to look for an alternate source of funds to fix that imbalance. Right now, under the county, the board's authority, county commissioners, these are the mitigating strategies that we can come up with relative to bringing that the Transportation Trust Fund back in balance. We can reduce the level of service we currently provide, which would reduce our expenses and bring us closer to being in line with the revenue source. We can supplement with other funds, whether that's general fund or other sources of funds. The county does have the authority to approve from 1 to 5 cents additional local option gas tax. And any additional local option fuel tax, gas tax would be shared. I'm going to go through some projections in the next couple slides. So the assumption is it's shared at the same rate as it is currently with the other cities. And so each additional 1 cent gas tax would generate about $3.5 million a year total, and the county share of that would be about $2.1 million. So I'm going to take you through several slides that kind of generate, this would be what our situation relative to Transportation Trust Fund would be if we had an additional 1 cent of the available 5 cents of gas tax. It's still not in balance, but it would move us from being out of our reserves from 22 to 23. So has a minor impact at 1 cent. This is what it would look like at 2 cents. It would still doesn't match the expense line, but it brings in more revenue to the point where it would postpone the spending our reserves down until 2020 or 2025. This is at 3 cents of additional gas tax. It does put us closer to the expense line, although it does after 24 start expending back the reserves, which would then be expended. So between that 3 and 4 cents of additional gas tax is really what would be required to bring us to a long-term balancing situation where we wouldn't expend our revenues in the short term at least. This is what it looks like at 4 cents. So into the foreseeable future, you see that we do have revenue. This is 5 cents. At 5 cents, you're actually, if it was, these are all predicated on implementing that gas tax in this upcoming fiscal year. So that would actually, at 5 cents, you're actually generating that first year between our expenses and the revenue collected would be an additional $5 million in that FY21 timeframe. 22 and 23, it continues to narrow because the expenses continue to climb, but it does provide a positive generation of revenue. One of the things that we continue to look at is indexing the gas tax. What that means is on an annual basis, based on the CPI, the amount of gas tax pennies that you have in place would be raised to compensate for the change in the CPI. The state indexes their gas tax right now, has ever since it was implemented in the 95 range. So theirs continues to climb, basically making their dollar still worth $1 from 95, where our dollar continues to be impacted by inflation. So I'll take you through a couple scenarios real quickly and then I'll be done. That this would be what our situation would look like if you had an additional 1 cent of the local option fuel tax, and through the legislature it was changed to where you could actually index the gas tax that we currently collect. So the gray line that you see on the chart is the revenue from our existing 1 cent. If we were to implement 1 cent non-indexed, the green line then becomes the 1 cent if it was indexed over time. So actually you can see there's a much more positive slope to the revenue if it's indexed. That's 1 cent. This is 2 cents. So 2 cents gets your revenue almost in a parallel situation to your expense line. And then 3 cents basically puts it to where you're generating that same, about the equivalent of what we saw at 4 cents. 3 cents indexed is about what we see in the other situation, 4 cents, but it would, if it was indexed, it would continue for a much longer period of time. So in summary, real quickly, the current Transportation Trust Fund is not in balance and will go into a negative situation in FY22. Additional funding is needed. We do have an additional 5 cents available in gas tax that we can get through the county commission. And then if there was a movement at the state legislature to index local option gas tax, that would be obviously a positive. Just generically speaking, the county is in this situation, but almost all counties are in the same situation, just because gas tax is not that sustainable revenue source. So that's it for right now, but helps you frame your discussions later in the day. Debbie?
Good morning. Can everybody hear me? I'm a little vertically challenged. All right. Well, good morning. I'm Debbie Leous. I am the Chief Financial Officer of the Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority. And I am very pleased to have this opportunity to talk about how public transit has been severely underfunded in our county. And it has been severely underfunded for decades. What I'd like you to do is take a little visualization at this moment and just visualize that every single day, 35,000 people in Pinellas County are getting on a bus. And they are going to work. They are going to work at places like the hotels on the beaches. They are the wait staff at our favorite local restaurants. They are administrative staff going to work. But we also have tourists getting on our trolleys. We have seniors going to medical appointments. We also have thousands of students who are on a budget who are going to class. We've heard a lot about surveys. We've reached out to our riders and we have asked them about our, how they like our service. They like the service we provide. They think we're doing a very good job. But there's a consistent message that comes back to us, and that is they want more. They want more frequency. They want more evening and weekend hours. They want more reliability. And we strive to give them that within the resources that we have today. And we understand that it's a new era of modern transit and that mobility needs are changing. So in response to that, we're very proud to say, we've become national leaders in innovation. We embrace new technologies such as our first mile, last mile, autonomous vehicles, increasing our electric bus fleet. And because of these innovations, we have been successful in getting more competitive grants than ever before over the last few years, all while we are reimagining our bus network. And in reimagining our bus network, we have been looking at wanting to increase frequency, to have faster, more sustainable service, like our BRT. And the BRT is something that cities across the country are doing to help increase ridership. And while we have been being innovative, we have also been working hard to be one of the most low-cost counties against our peers in the country. On the slide, you'll see on the very left-hand side, Pinellas County. We are so efficient. We are so efficient that we can provide twice as much service as the community on the very right-hand side for the same amount of money. However, when you take a look at this chart, you can see Pinellas County at the very bottom of the chart. So while we are very efficient, you can see from the bottom right-hand column, we are the lowest funded transit area in the country. Now on this chart, is Buffalo. It's about the 7th line down. And I am from Buffalo, New York. And it's the same, about the same size metropolitan service area. But if you take a look, they get twice as much funding as we do. And no surprise, they have twice as many riders as we do. Now I've highlighted in blue 3 areas that are now increasing their investment through, as we talked about, Indigo in Indianapolis, through an income tax or through sales tax. So we've got Broward County with that. And we also have on here Hillsborough County, which just passed their increased investment in public transportation. Now, speaking of Hillsborough, Hillsborough will now be getting 3 times the investment in their operations than Pinellas County. 5 times the investment in capital is Pinellas County. And even before the referendum, Hillsborough was getting funding for transit, for their BRT line, for operations, for bus capital, transit disadvantaged, but also getting money from the surface transportation dollars that would go towards projects. And Hillsborough is not unique. Other counties in the urban areas such as Broward, Orange, Osceola, Duval, and Alachua all allocate additional funding towards public transit. So the list is fairly long on the left-hand side and very, very short on the right-hand side. So what would we do? What are we going to do? Well, the first thing is, if we don't get any additional funding, we are going to start cutting service, and we are going to start cutting service in this fiscal year. We are already operating at a deficit for the first time in a long time. And the second option is if we have $5 million of recurring funding, that will help us to maintain our service and maybe grow it a little bit. And I'm going back to this slide because I don't believe that we are striving to be the worst in the country. That is not acceptable. What we do want to take a look at is option number 3. With looking at recurring funding starting, let's say, $50 million to $80 million, we can start to meet the needs of the community. We can start to improve service, become like some of the other faster-paced cities in the nation, like Austin. We get tons of requests every day. I know Mayor Bajowski's here from Dunedin, and we've gotten requests from Dunedin, Tarpon Springs, Mayor Vivas, from Oldsmar, Seminole, Gulfport, Treasure Island, Safety Harbor, from all of St. Petersburg, Clearwater, all over the county. But we cannot provide this service because we don't have the funding. Now, the other thing is, without adequate funding, we are going to lose out on federal and state grants. Just last week, we had FDOT come to us with funding for a much-needed service, a much-asked-for service, from downtown St. Pete to the airport. There were millions of dollars that are on the table. But if it's a matching grant, we will be turning that money down. And that's a very important point to remember. We cannot move forward without adequate funding. And Pinellas County has been very supportive of transportation. They've been very supportive of our regional transit premium plan that we have. But again, there's no money that has been identified. So what would we do if we had the money? We would invest it into transit supportive corridors, such as 4th Street, such as the East Bay Corridor. We would put it in transit-oriented areas. I find it very discouraging that we have the #1 beach in the country and no way to get people from the airport to the beaches. We would be able to invest in regional services, to be able to bring people to our largest employment centers in the region. There are a lot of benefits to public transportation, to our residents, to our tourists, to our business, to our community as a whole. But I'm not going to go into all of that. I think Whit did a fantastic job listing all that earlier today. But what I will say is public transit in the Tampa Bay region is one of the worst in the country. And Hillsborough is moving forward. They're moving up that chart with an investment in their services, an investment in their economy. And Pinellas is lagging behind. PSTA has done all it can do within the resources that we have. And it's not a matter of if or when. It is a matter of we know we need to provide services to our community. And now is the time to have a plan of action to move forward for a critical, significant investment in public transit in our community in Pinellas County. And that concludes my presentation.
Okay, so hopefully that provided a little bit of context for y'all. Now we're going to transition to our small group discussions, and we're going to take almost an hour for that. We're given tags to identify which table you should be at, so you should be at the table with the icon. And we have a facilitator at each table who will work with you to go through some questions and guide the discussion. And I just want to say that if you start going into a different tangent, but it's a good conversation and it's productive, that's great. That's really what we're here for today. You have some handouts with some information at each of your tables. That's just for reference. And we will take a break after the small groups, and then we will have you all report out your findings. So you need to identify somebody at the table who will be a scribe, and that scribe will also be the reporter of what you discussed at your table. And we're looking for areas of consensus and agreement, and we're also looking for areas where you're not so sure exactly what you agree on. So let's go ahead and get started at the tables. Thank you all very much. So what we're going to do now is ask each of the people who've volunteered to report out the discussion at their tables to just take a minute to hit the key points. And really, this is not meant to be a speech. It's meant to be a quick summation because we have about 30 minutes that we want to take for the reporting out of the conversations at each table. But I think it'll be a good opportunity just to hear, are there some areas of common dialogue, common discussion, some key points that there's general agreement, or there's areas of disagreement? And we want to know just as well what the areas of disagreement are. And just a reminder that over lunch, we're going to have a panel discussion. And we've got Mayor Kriseman, Commissioner Seel, and we've got some representatives of the business community who are going to be on our panel. And you've got some index cards, kind of like my cheat sheet here, at your table. And we're going to ask you if there's a question you would like to ask the panel to put that on the index card, and we'll read that and have the panel address those questions too. Your questions are probably a whole heck of a lot better than the questions we wrote for the panel. So I'm just going to ask, I'm going to go around randomly and see which table might be ready to report out. Do we have a handheld microphone, or do we need everybody to come up here and present? Because we can do the whole Phil Donahue thing. We do have a handheld mic. Okay, good. I'm going to ask our front table up here. Let's start at the table where we have Matt and Joshua and others. I don't know who your scribe, and you can't jump up here because we blocked it off. But there's a handheld mic coming. And if you could just take a minute to hit the high points.
Is this on? Hello, hello.
Yeah, we can.
Excellent. So I was worried that we'd go last and not just say everything everybody else said. So we'll go first. One of our main key points was making sure that we have transportation options that support diverse needs in different communities, as well as connecting different regions. So to Orlando, thinking outside of our region and how do we connect to other regions, as well as all the way down to micromobility within our communities. That also led to our second point, which in the future, we see more technology-assisted, smaller vehicles, and we kept coming back to this point about not making investments today that will become obsolete in the future. So really focusing on developing for the future while bridging that need. And then finally, the final point was looking at diverse revenue sources that are specifically tied to and matched to their needs. So the taxpayers know what they're paying for, and then they get those services.
Very good. All right, thank you. Let's go up here to this table with Mayor Beavis. I don't know who your spokesperson is. Okay, all right, Felicia.
Hi. So we basically said the same thing, except, so we're on table number 2. That doesn't fare well for the last table, probably. But we see the need to create better regional coordination and a regional plan to improve transit choices, reliability, coverage, frequency, connectivity, and we talked about providing a local funding source.
Excellent. All right, very good. I'll just keep going along the path here. This is the bicycle table. Hope you came up with a lot of good bicycle ideas.
We do have a lot of good bicycle ideas, actually. We have an avid cyclist at our table. So we talked a lot about, for the important transportation needs, safety, and that actually did go back around to bicyclists and pedestrians and how we have a pretty large problem in the county here. So our result was that we think that a 3-foot warning area would be a nice option for those bicyclists, and then an engineering and education campaign could be a solution for that here in the county. Mobility access was another one, efficient travel routes and timing, and then our biggest need here we thought we agreed on was public safety. Our community, how we think it'll change in the next 10 to 20 years. Some of the things we looked into, increased change in technology overall, increased population. We think it's going to become more dense and congested, and that we're going to see a continued increase in tourists and visitors. So with that, we also think we're going to see increased use in automated vehicles, and this is going to cause our neighborhoods to change and possibly our land use to change as well. The change in transportation, we think we'll see an increased variety of transportation methods available in the long run. And then our last one, the transportation investments. We think that they should include basically everything on our list, but facilitate redevelopment, ensure access to higher education, attract a highly educated workforce, connect low-income communities to higher wage jobs, and support tourism. And then the composition of who pays for our transportation network, everyone ultimately, but the business community, those public-private partnerships, the government, and then the residents.
All right, thank you. Let's go to the Skyway Bridge table right behind you there.
So we had a lot of the same feedback. So on question number 1, where, you know, what is the important transportation needs of our community? In no particular order, we just said that we thought night and weekend service of some kind, more frequency, and assortment of transportation options, because we have such a diverse county that I hate to split our county up, but North County is not the same as South County, and the transportation needs are different, different size vehicles, different type of vehicles. We need to service everyone. Low income, higher income, weekend trips, tourists getting around, seniors, that type of thing. We need to invest in bus pull-offs and bus lanes to help alleviate the traffic. And one of the other important points we thought was the completion of US 19, because everybody knows the south end is doing really well, at least that section, but the north end, it's putting a lot of traffic into our neighborhoods. And how do we get a BRT on 19 if it's not a full service interstate type of road and moves our people and gets them out of our neighborhood? So we felt that that was important. Question number 2, how do we see the community changing in the next 10 or 20 years? We saw a lot more home-based operations, you know, Airbnb, people working online, that type of thing. A lot more shopping online. My nieces and nephews get their groceries online and get them delivered to their house. How does that affect transportation, and taking a look at that? A lot more mixed-use development. People want to live closer to where they can walk somewhere. More rental apartments. And we saw more transit hubs, if you will, where you're not just PSTA down in off of Ulmerton, it's PSTA everywhere, or hubs where they can catch a bus or a golf cart or whatever they're going to do, and more alternative forms of transportation like autonomous vehicles. And we said that there was no one-size-fits-all, multiple modes of transportation that we haven't thought about. And then question number 3, our transportation investments should, and we said all of the above as she just read. You know, it should support tourism, attract higher education workforce, facilitate redevelopment, connect low-income communities to higher wage jobs. But we also said we have to remind people that, you know, we need to get the higher income people out of their cars, and they're very tied to their 2 or 3 car homes. And so we got to get them where they want to go. Do they want to go to a Rays game on the weekend, or do they want to, you know, whatever? We got to get them out of their cars too, and that's not the same transportation as a low-income person trying to get to a job. And a really important point, we thought that the transportation investments should alleviate the bottlenecks where we know they are. And we have to think about that. That's, if you can tell people that we're going to help alleviate traffic in certain areas that are really bad by doing certain types of transportation or transit, I think the community would be very supportive of that. And then what is the composition of who pays for it? Everyone. Everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go behind you to Mayor Brown and that table. I don't know who the spokesperson is. Trish?
All right, so we talked about important transportation needs, including the underfunding of transit and addressing that, addressing first mile, last mile solutions for riders, ensuring that we're planning for connectivity to Brightline as that comes into the region, and making sure that we are prioritizing connectivity between the key activity centers of the county. When we talked about changes that are coming, we actually talked about things that are here now that we need to make sure we're addressing that are sooner than the 10 or 20 year time frame. Scooter disruption, for example, other emerging technologies that are going to cause us to reconsider how we address our bike lanes and our roadways and other changes. Howard Franklin redevelopment changes, making sure that we're aligning our planning, transit, economic development, and housing issues, making sure that we're addressing housing affordability changes. And then, like the other tables have said, you know, transportation investment needs to be all things to all people, and the shared cost really needs to come from the residents and the tourists and the business community. And an important piece of that is going to be to communicate all of these interrelated benefits so that we can demonstrate that there's a reason to do this for everyone.
Excellent, very good. Let's go to the truck table in the back there with Deb Sullivan.
So our most important transportation needs, we realized were, I've got a Jersey voice, I'm probably fine, was the east-west connection being not as addressed as north-south. Being closer to the beaches, we see that a lot more. So we were concerned about that. There's a lot of congestion on that area. We also talked a lot about education, just vehicular education as far as cell phone use, keeping people focused on the roads, watching the bikes, watching the motorcyclists, crosswalks, making sure that people are being conscious of where they are during these congested areas. We talked about a freight train that is in Pinellas Park right now, running through, maybe being transformed into some sort of passenger train. We wanted to focus on Pinellas Transit first, prior to doing over the bridge. The future goals, we looked at the autonomy in vehicles that are heading our way, and we talked about St. Pete. I think someone else also mentioned at the Skyway table where, you know, this younger group is living and working and playing in an area that could alleviate some traffic congestion. We did talk about the at-home deliveries as well, Amazon, you know, so you talk about that, well, I'm not going out to shop, but those delivery vehicles are. So is it really alleviating traffic or equalizing or increasing? And then honestly, it's just communicating to the funders, which are our constituents, our residents, our taxpayers, our tourists, how to prioritize. It's just an overwhelming feat right now. It seems to be getting all our ducks in a row so we can communicate the prioritization.
Excellent, thank you.
You're welcome.
let's go to the next table here, the pedestrian table with Hillary and Commissioner Long.
So our little group solved all of the problems of public transportation in our region and our county. Not yet. And we really talked a lot about the needs and the fact that all kinds of options should be on the table so that we develop a potpourri of different options for people to take advantage of. And we talked about how the beaches are the poster child for the fact that we're 40 years behind the times, because the #1 complaint on TripAdvisor, if you look at what our tourists are telling us, is that their trip was semi-ruined because they were stuck for over an hour on the bridge trying to get over to our beaches. And oh, by the way, they missed their first sunset in our beautiful community. So we talked about all kinds of funding options. Everything was on the table: sales tax, toll roads, tourist development tax, gas tax, partnerships, and even bonding. And one of the things that we really talked quite a bit about was how elected officials tend to get paralyzed in trying to figure out the long-term solutions and where we'll be 10, 15, and 20 years from now, instead of what they actually can do today to begin to make a huge transition for our community and for our region. We also talked about the enormous paradigm shift that's happening with the new technologies that come on board so quickly and so fast, it's almost impossible to keep up. And the fact that we are funding transportation today, just like we were almost 50 years ago, is a clear indication that we are not nimble enough in our thinking and in our solutions where we try to plan for the future. It takes real courage, real leadership, political will, and we cannot be afraid to have an honest-to-God, sincere conversation about taxes and what they're for and why they're necessary if you want to live in a civilized society. And then this was priceless, absolutely priceless. The comment was made that people who live in real cities are smarter than everybody else. And you know why that is? It's because they spend an hour to an hour and a half or more every day riding on a fabulous train or a bus, and they read. Imagine that. They're not just reading bullet points off of their cell phones. I thought that was priceless. Also, thank you, Carl.
They're also healthier, too.
And they're healthier, yes, because some of them are riding bikes and walking. So the comment was also made that it's not a secret that we are the most dangerous community, metro area in the entire country because we are so underinvested in our public transportation options. And by the way, in case you forgot or you weren't paying attention, we just passed in November a referendum that's in our Constitution that says it's impossible for the state of Florida to raise taxes. So guess what? That means we are the cavalry. And if ever we want to transform the way we live today in terms of the culture, we are the ones that have to make the decision, and we are the ones that have to figure it out before the state government and the federal government decide that they're going to stop us from doing anything. So the consensus at this table is we all agreed that everyone, from the wealthiest down to the very bottom of our economic society, should have skin in the game in paying for what we become 5 and 10 years from now. Okay, look at that. I didn't even take an hour to say it.
Thank you. Nice job. I was so hoping you would be the spokesperson for that table. Let's move it up one to the construction table here in the middle with our new county administrator. I'm not, Linda, are you, or who's there? Okay. Yeah.
So I don't know how I'm going to follow up that fiery speech.
Sorry.
So one of the things that we noticed, especially in development, is that we're going to have to do it incrementally. So if we're going to start with buses, we have to start by maintaining the bus lines that we have, moving into bus rapid transit, adding extra lines, and then we can kind of make the shift into rail, incremental rails along, State Road 60, the Central Avenue and St. Pete, and then eventually potentially moving into things like the CSX line and all of that. We also found that we really need to communicate the need to everyone across all age, all economic groups, all education levels, how transportation is going to benefit them and why they need to be involved with this and be involved in the services. And then finally, we kind of talked a little bit more about some alternative systems to, instead of just like adding extra lines or adding extra bus lanes, focusing more on intelligent signalized systems, really balancing our resource sustainability, and even kind of adding in the bed tax and hopefully having like a shuttle service between some hotels and the airfare. So.
All right, very good, thank you. And then we'll go back to the signals table there with Mayor Creticus.
Thank you. Regarding the important transportation needs in our community, this group spoke of a variety of options. Intelligent transportation system needs to be more intelligent, better pedestrian and bicycle safety, and options for elevating that cool factor for public transportation to increase the number of choice riders that we have. But overwhelmingly, our group talked about better bus service. That's something that we all know is a problem that needs to be solved. We need better frequency, better hours, and better routes. That ease of mobility, we know, is the key to people having better paying jobs, adding to quality of life where parents can spend more time with their children rather than commuting on a long bus route. And also having that better bus service can increase the number of choice riders, which makes it something that's valuable to everyone. Our community will change in many ways over the next 10 to 20 years. And through that, we're going to be seeing more diverse options, more ways that we can get from point A to point B. We also can expect to see zoning changes to improve density, including moving from single-family homes to more areas where multifamily homes can be built. That density makes better bus service make all the more sense. We're also going to build on our successes, things like bus rapid transit that's coming. We'll be able to look at that, see what the successes are, and see how we can expand it in even better ways. Our transportation investments should connect us, and they should be visible. We should be able to see the progress. We should be able to point to things that are working and say, let's do more of that. You got to pay for it, though. And we're looking at a combination of public and private partnerships, federal grants and appropriations. Look at the sales tax. And yes, as far as a gas tax, with a gradual increase, such as the county fuel tax being indexed and increased the same way that the state does. These are bold actions because we have serious problems and we need real solutions. It's time now for this group to come together and make that happen. It's time to be bold, it's time to be brave, and have the courage to say these are our values for our community, and we're willing to put money behind it to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Sarah, let's go straight back to the boats. The ferry, thank you.
All right, hello everyone. A lot of what we had come up with has already been said today, but one of the most important things that we find that is a challenge in our community is our connectivity. Our connectivity to our downtowns, our connectivity to our beaches. One of the great ways we thought to kind of start that connectivity and that backbone would be to energize the CSX line and other major thoroughfares throughout the county that are already existing, and then build from there. But the most important thing, I think, in addressing the current issues is that we need to be nimble, we need to be quick, we need to be coming up with reliable routes and solutions today. There's no more time to wait, and we need to get out of our own way. We need to make sure that we're picking up the kind of low-hanging fruit of transportation options and getting those things addressed now instead of waiting on perfection down the road. As we grow and our demographics change, the needs obviously will change, and we thought some of the solutions for that could be dedicated lanes, integrated solutions, and more options that increase safety for bicycles and pedestrians with our Complete Streets projects. Capital investments will require public and private partnerships going forward. I think that that's something that, you know, all of us are starting to see is going to be a key piece of the capital investment portion. And for the last question, I think just like a lot of people, we kind of took all of those different you know, ideas of what investment should include, and we just made a sentence with it. We believe our transportation system and investment should attract a highly educated workforce. It should connect our low-income communities to higher-wage jobs that will facilitate redevelopment and then spur transportation or tourism dollars, which will then help to pay for the overall operating costs going forward. But when it comes to funding, nothing is or should be off the table, and everyone should pay for it. So, thank you.
Very good. Excellent. Let's come forward to the light rail table over here. I know you're all in favor of light rail, but the little blue symbol there.
All right, so most of the points have already been covered by everyone here. So a couple of other items, is changing perception of public transportation to increase ridership. I think right now people don't associate buses and such as a way of getting around here. It's more of in low-income cases, utilizing multimodal transportation, especially getting to areas like the beaches, and pedestrian safety was a big concern. As far as the future, we see more mixed-use redevelopments, increasing our usage of our resources, such as the waterways. And with the last question, we pretty much stated all the above because we need to do all of those things to improve our county. And again, for paying for it, we had more of a mixed use for tourism to pay for it, but again, everything should be on the table.
Excellent. All right, how about the scooter table up here?
So we're the scooter table or the table of planner nerds here. So we had a lot of discussion. Really to start off kind of from a macro level, we looked at how do we become more adaptable to weather change? It's something we talked about earlier, right, in extreme weather. We really felt that we're at a tipping point for affordability as well. So how do we connect our transportation connections to housing? We focused a lot on transit and creating this reliable spine to facilitate transportation and redevelopment. With that said, we also felt that our transportation disadvantaged communities are key as well. So how can we be a little bit more flexible in connecting some of our communities? You know, is that kind of a demand response type service that's out there? We also looked at a lot of different, we talked a lot about different revenue sources. So can we look at parking requirements and reducing parking requirements and coming up with transportation in lieu fees? You know, there's some communities that have done transit in lieu fees, so that was something that we talked about. Really, we felt with technology out there today, there's going to be a lot more of that. And how do we become? Someone mentioned, I really like this, the technology county. We're small enough. Where can we connect some of that into more private investments? So we felt like that's going to be more of a key into the future. So that's it.
Good. Thank you. I think we have the car table over here.
All right, someone had to go last. Let's see. So for our transit needs, first off, we need to be able to partner with employers so we can have access to job centers, possibly expanding our first mile, last mile program that already exists in Pinellas County. Maybe employers can work with getting people to and from a transit hub. We also need to expand PSTA services. We already see that happening with our LX service on Route 52 going up 49th Street. And transition between counties and regions. And lastly, more options to lure larger employers, such as we saw happen earlier last year with Amazon. They had the areas that got a wonderful gift from Amazon had transit. Let's see, community change for the next coming years. Increased density is going to happen. We need to be able to access job centers further away. Many people who live in Pinellas work in Hillsborough or even further out into Polk counties. Transit that serves developing residential centers. We see high rises and going up in downtown St. Pete, as well as multifamily housing in mid Pinellas County, Pinellas Park, and helping to create a live, work, play neighborhood. And most importantly, we need a car-free living. People who feel like they can abandon their cars and get around Pinellas County without the need of 1, 2, 4 cars at home. Investment should connect 3 things. It should connect people to centers, people for work or for play. It should connect tourists to destinations. We have world-class beaches, and without tourists, Pinellas County would not be what it is today. And finally, we need to connect regions. We also need to invest to support feasible, walkable communities, and funding needs to be shared amongst all stakeholders.
All right, great. Okay, that was really helpful. So remember that if you've written down your comments, we need those back. So make sure the facilitator has all the things you've written down, because we're going to capture that and write about it. So what we're going to do now is try to do a quick summary of what we heard. And Linda, do you want to come on up here real quick? I know you love the spotlight, but I'm going to bring you up here anyway. So Linda Fisher of our staff has been helping kind of synthesize, but we did hear a lot of common themes. And I just want to say, I think, first of all, very consistent with the survey findings is that this is a technology-ready county. And there's a strong sense that technology can really help us, but we need to harness that technology and direct it in ways that really add value to our neighborhoods, to our communities, to our corridors, and leverage the right kind of investment. In addition, I think we heard from a funding standpoint that people want to see that everybody is a partner in how we get things done, that it doesn't just fall on the backs of residents or users or the tourists, but that there's everybody's going to have to step up if we want to step up our game. I think I heard that pretty consistently. What else, Linda, stood out to you?
Regional coordination was a priority for virtually everybody. We need to connect our regional destinations and also have a strategy for coordinating so that everyone feels that they have a seat at the table, that everyone feels that they're benefiting, and that we're not competing for the same funding dollars.
That's very good.
Economic opportunity for all parts of our community came up a lot. We need to connect people to jobs. We need to make our community attractive enough for our high-wage workers to come, and that will attract additional businesses to come to the area. And we need to redevelop our communities to be more transit-oriented, to be more urban, and have a better sense of place to appeal to a diverse population.
Very good. Okay. So that sort of reflects what I said earlier, that the neat thing about Pinellas and the advantage that we really have is we've got all these 24 cities, right? I mean, we're not going to change that. And they all have a distinctive culture and a distinctive character. So shouldn't our transportation system recognize that? So that came through in a lot of the commentary. I'm going to ask Hillary to take over from now and go back to the polling activity, and we'll see if we're consistent with what you did before or different.
Okay, so I noticed we have a lot of new people from when we did this the first time. So if you heard all the instructions the first time, take a Facebook break, take some photos, just relax for a few seconds while I explain this again. So if you are an elected official and you weren't here the first time, or if you were here the first time, you're going to be filling out the back of the sheet of paper in addition to using the clickers. We need that for sunshine law purposes. If you're not an elected official, you can still fill out that sheet of paper, but you're not required to. So you'll notice that some of these answers have many to choose from. We are asking you to just choose one answer, and that's what we have to do sometimes in transportation, is choose 1 or 2 projects of many that we might like. And yes. if anyone needs a clicker who didn't have one, we have a few extras if you just want to raise your hand. And the clicker works. You can only choose one answer. You really can't mess this up. So you can press it as many times as you like. It's only going to record once. If you change your mind, it records the last number that you push. No, you cannot steal someone's. No voter fraud, please. So I see some of you are already answering the first question, so I'll move on to that. If tomorrow we have new money to spend on transportation, what would you spend it on? 1, widening roads. 2, rail. 3, better bus system. 4, trails. 5, safer streets. 6, sidewalk network. 7, signal technology. 8, transportation network adaptation and resiliency. And 9, other. And if you fill out other, please do mark on your sheet what that other is in your mind. Okay, 10-second warning. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And this looks, if I recall correctly, it looks a little bit more split than the first time. So let's move on to question 2. What area in our transportation system do you believe is most adequately funded already? So 1, roadways. 2, bus network. 3, premium transit, and that's rail, BRT, etc. 4, trails. 5, sidewalk network. Or 6, signal technology. Okay, 10-second warning. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Roadways with trails as a second. Let's move on to question 3. Which of these funding sources do you most prefer? And again, this is a long one, so I'll explain it again for those of you who weren't here this morning. This is talking about which of these funding sources you prefer for new projects that we might like to do in the future. 1 is tolling, 2 is gas tax, excuse me. 3 is special district fees, 4, sales tax, 5, developer fees, 6, public-private partnerships, 7, assessments, 8, tax increment financing, and 9, general revenue. And just remember to be filling out on your sheet of paper too if you're an elected official. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. So sales tax has it again with gas tax as a second and public-private partnerships coming in third, it looks like. Question 4, do you think it's most important to fund projects, 1, in our local communities and neighborhoods, 2, that improve countywide connections, or 3, that connect our region? Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. So last question. And again, once we're done with this, please remember to give your polling sheet to your facilitator so we can keep track of that. Question 5. So thinking back to question 1, which asked about our immediate needs, what we would spend money on tomorrow if we had it. Let's think ahead to 2045. In 2045, what would you like to be spending transportation money on? 1, widening roads. 2, rail. 3, better bus system. 4, trails. 5, safer streets. 6, sidewalk network. 7, signal technology. 8, transportation network adaptation and resiliency. Or 9, other. And again, if it's other, please note what that other might be. All right, 10-second warning. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And that takes us out. I'll turn it back over to Whit. Thank you all for participating.
Okay, so we're starting to get lunch set up, but it's still early for me to eat lunch. So what I thought I would do is just take an opportunity, since I gave a presentation along with Ken Jacobs and Debbie Leous of PSTA, that we would come up here and kind of take 5 or 10 minutes to see if there are questions of the panelists, maybe stump the expert kind of question. And if you have any questions, we do have a microphone that we're wandering around. But if there are any questions for the three of us, we'll take a few minutes to do that now. You just shout them all out if you have any. Yes, Patty. Oh, here comes the microphone. Hang on.
Sarah. Many times I heard first mile, last mile discussion, and it is awesome, and we really appreciate it, and it's well used. Debbie, where does the money come from for that, and how long will we have it?
We get the money from the state of Florida through the Transportation Disadvantage Program, and I'm not sure how long that'll keep going, but we hope it keeps going forever, because it's really helping to get people to jobs, especially when you know, we don't have the transportation in that particular area. And so it really is helping us to save money. We had a discussion, I think, at this table over here, where it isn't always economical to have a big bus in a certain area. So the first mile, last mile will help people get us to our transportation hubs. And that'll help us as we look to change service as well.
Okay, so that's funded each year, maybe, if the state decides they'll give it to us?
And I'll look to, I don't know where Cassandra is, but is that, it's not, is there an end date on that, Cassandra? No, not really. Okay, good. I don't know if you heard her, it's not enough to cover the whole cost of the program. It's been wildly successful.
And Pinellas has much more transportation disadvantaged paratransit riders in our county than many other counties do. And we're not even meeting close to the need. So it's a huge part of transportation mobility for people who have disadvantages getting around. Anything else? Any other questions? Right here, Mayor Bajowski.
It'll probably be Debbie or Whit. I know Brad's in the room. But another hindrance to PSTA, and I don't know if everybody in the room knows about it or not, but they are capped at their 0.75 millage, as well as they are not fully funded by all 24 cities in the county. And so I'd like to hear from you what, if anything, because that's all funding, and it's a significant amount of funding from those cities that don't contribute. It's kind of like the school tax. Even if you don't have kids going into school, you're still paying it. I'd like to understand what can be done about that, and what can be done about in the legislature about the 0.75 cap as well, because none of that was in any of these funding scenarios. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Go ahead,
Okay,
Debbie.
Sure. You are correct, Mayor. We are at PSTA at our cap at the 0.75. If we had every city participating with PSTA, it would be an additional $4.1 million. Currently, 2 of those cities that are providing the largest piece of that funding, which is St. Pete Beach and Treasure Island, do contribute right now for some of the service that we do provide. So if we were to make it equal and deduct that, it'd be about $3.2 million that we would get annually. But notwithstanding that, it's about $4.1 million.
And then to increase the millage cap of
would have to be a
0.75
state
would be an
budget.
act of the state legislature.
Right, and correct. And for those particular areas to participate, they would have to take that to referendum in each of their cities.
Other questions? Here's one right here. Oh, and Ken Welch over there, go back to him.
How many, kind of a two-part question, how many times per year does PSTA ask the federal government or intervals for federal funding? And then my other part of that is, can PSTA get either a piece of the penny for Pinellas or a bigger piece of the penny for Pinellas?
Okay, on an annual basis, we go out to the federal government for our formula funds, and we list out the projects. Other than that, we put, when I say we, our planning department does a phenomenal job at putting out applications for competitive grants from the federal government. We have been extremely successful in getting money for that. Some of our recent ones are low-no grants for additional electric vehicles, and we are looking to get a significant amount of funding for our Central Avenue BRT. For operations, the federal government essentially does not fund operations. They do allow for a small portion to go to preventative maintenance, and we limit what that is so that in times like this when the federal government is not acting in our best interests, we're not significantly impacted in the short term. And then the penny for Pinellas, we don't get anything from that at this point.
And again, because that's limited to capital, it can't be used for operating costs. But I think that's a conversation to be had is, you know, is that something that gets matched? Commissioner Welch.
Thank you. And this isn't a setup, but that was the exact question I wanted to ask. You, Debbie, when you presented to Fort Pinellas, showed that your reserves will be depleted in FY22. And I know a few years back, the PSTA informally asked the MPO for $4 to $8 million for capital. So how much of that deficit is being driven by capital needs, and could it be replaced or mitigated by penny for Pinellas funding?
Out of that deficit in there right now, we have about $5 million towards buses. We have about $5 million towards Central Avenue BRT. So anything we can do to help with that piece of it will also help us to run operations for a longer period of time or to increase service or change service. So the penny for Pinellas would be very helpful for capital.
Was the ask to MPO a few years ago specifically for capital for buses?
It was, and as I mentioned earlier, Hillsborough County provides funding to HART for capital projects, primarily buses. I think it's averaged out about $8 million a year. We were looking to try to get on the list, if you will, to get some of that money that we could use towards capital.
And I'll just clarify that a little bit. In 2015, when I arrived here, I asked our board, are we willing to pay to put on our priority list and ask for funding of replacement buses? And the board at the time said, we really don't want to fund replacement buses, but we're happy to fund expansion of service. And so we have prioritized the Central Avenue Bus Rapid Transit project. We do have other PSTA corridor priorities on our priority list, but to date, the MPO, as Ford Pinellas, has not put on its funding request money for replacement buses like Hillsborough MPO does. And that's something we can certainly consider this year, and we'll take that up with our board. Nobody has any questions about how quickly I can get through the traffic signals?
Don't start that one.
And why do I have to stop at every traffic light?
Related question to budgeting and funding. We heard a lot this morning about frequency and reliability and coverage, and obviously all those things cost money. And you explained already that we can't receive federal funds to support operations. So could you explain to everybody where PSTA's operating funds come from?
Certainly. Right now it comes from our fare box revenue. It comes from our block grant money from the state of Florida is a big piece, and the largest piece of it is our property tax revenue. We also try to look to have smaller pieces as advertising revenue, interest income.
Mayor?
One of the things that we kept hearing repeatedly was how we need to have some successes. And I've got this Advantage Pinellas resident study here in front of me, and I'm wanting us to think about what we've been talking about. And the number one thing that the residents said was 70% of the participants indicated that better traffic time signals are their top priority. We have an intelligent system and our table said it's not very intelligent. When I get stopped 3 times from Almerton Road to SPC Seminole this morning, at 4 stoplights, I got stopped 3 times. That's not a very intelligent system. And we really do need to do a better job of addressing what our residents want before we can get them to buy into these other plans that we all know we need.
Sorry, Ken. I set you up for that one. Do you want to address that at all?
We work annually on retiming the traffic signals. We haven't finished the implementation of the new system. There are some roadways that haven't been implemented yet. 113th Street is one of those that hasn't been implemented yet. But again, our focus on an annual basis is to revisit signal timing. We spend a significant amount of money on consultants every year to retime traffic signals and make sure that they address all the changes that are occurring in the county relative to the traffic. The new system has some state-of-the-art signal software that is something that we're using that we've seen great benefit with. I think it's just a matter of completing the entire system, and we should see a lot more consistency in the signal timing that people drive through.
And I'll just say, you know, it's a few key corridors, but 66th Street, 580 Main Street, East Bay are 3 that have that adaptive signal control system. And I think they are working pretty well on those corridors. Recently, I had to drive down to South Pasadena to brief one of my board members. This is a couple of months ago. And I left where I live near Safety Harbor. I got over to 66th Street. I went all the way down. I didn't hit a single traffic signal. I just flowed all the way through. But the key is you can't speed. You got to go the speed limit, and you get in that platoon, and you get a pretty good rhythm going. But one of the problems we have here in Pinellas County is we have a lot of aggressive drivers. And I got to tell you, I thought we had aggressive drivers in Orlando. I moved over here, and my eyes were wide open. All you have to do is drive Drew Street. You know, that's one of the challenges is how do you manage everybody? And really, if people go the speed limit, you'll find that the system works much better. But we do have some corridors to work on, and that's true. So we still have a little bit of work to do on that. Yes, Karen, wait for the mic right behind you.
Sorry. Thanks, Sarah. In the proposals for the increases in gas taxes, we saw an implementation from the county that it would only focus on roads. Is there any way to take that gas tax and move it into operations for PSTA?
The gas tax.
Just say yes.
There would certainly be some opportunity. We're not exactly sure at what level, but again, I think the slide was meant to show the current status of the Transportation Trust Fund. That's the sole funding source to maintain and operate our roadway network. So over and above that, whatever the board determines is the best way to utilize those funds is certainly up for discussion.
And you know, I'll say, I go around and I meet with all the cities, and I don't think I've heard from any city that says we're not getting enough of that revenue from the gas tax for roadway maintenance or sidewalk maintenance. I see Matt Spohr here up front. I've heard it from him. You know, so I think all the cities feel like they're barely able to maintain what they need to maintain in their cities. So that's a shared revenue source. So this is not just Pinellas County. It's a compact, really, between the cities and the county for how we spend our revenue. And it does come down to policy priorities, ultimately. We have one up here with Commissioner Eggers, and then we probably want to get ready, move into lunch, and then our panel.
Just talking about the doing more with what we have now before we go asking for additional funding from our residents. I think Mayor Criticos touched on, our system, our ITS, trying to do that better so that, let's get that right first. And then I think the indexed gas tax, which maybe we don't have much chance getting that done from Tallahassee, but that's certainly an added source of funding that we ought to be at least letting our legislators know that that might be something to consider. The other cities that aren't on the PSTA customer list as far as paying. And then something about the tourist tax redistribution, maybe some of those funds that might be eligible. I just think there's some taxes that are in place that our residents are saying, we'll use those differently, because we think you're right, there are some priorities here. Use those differently, reprioritize before you come asking for another penny. So just your thoughts on maybe identifying the different levels. You talked about needing $50 million. But what if we what if you get 10 million? What will that do? What if you get 20 million? What will that do? Maybe if you could break, not now, but maybe you can break that out for us so that we can start to understand. No, now? So we can start to understand what each $10 million additional would actually get us as residents in the county. So.
Yeah, I think just to your point, we had talked about this a little bit internally. There's such a great variety of menu of things that we can do, and I think someone said it along the way, it won't be just one answer, it'll be many answers to this. It'd be almost kind of fun to put it as a menu in saying, put the dollar signs, these give us bigger dollars, but also what's more difficult to get, what's easier to get, and kind of list it down as a different way of looking at it.
One of the challenges that PSTA has is that there are state grants for transit service. And PSTA puts in their applications, and they're really good about putting in these applications, and they're queued up for several years. But typically, that money is not decided at the District 7 level. That's decided up in Tallahassee for DOT. And they typically get about 2/3 of the money they requested. So then you get service that you want to put out there, but it's not what you envisioned. You can't run as frequently or the same span of service. So you're faced with a dilemma: is do we put out less than what we wanted in that service? And so that's just an issue that's statewide in how we fund transit. And that's another thing that we can talk to our legislature about. One of the legislative platforms that Ford Pinellas is developing, which is consistent with all the MPOs around the state, is the strategic intermodal system dollars that go to I-275, that go to US 19, right now won't fund any transit unless it's fixed guideway transit, which means light rail or monorail or something like that. So even express buses going from our great beach in Clearwater Beach over the Courtney Campbell Causeway to the airport, an intermodal center, can't be funded with strategic intermodal system funds. And what the significance of that is, if you think of the state's transportation trust fund as being 100% of all the revenue sources, about 75% of that goes to the strategic intermodal system. And so roads like Ulmerton Road, not on it. East Bay Drive, not on it. Alt US 19, not on it. 66th Street, all these state roads, Gulf Boulevard, not on that list. And that's 25% of our funding. So if we were able to create a little bit of legislative leadership there so that the strategic intermodal system dollars can go towards transit, say in the I-275 corridor or up and down US 19, that would alleviate a lot of pressure on PSTA. So those are some options. One more question here, Michael Smith, and maybe two more. Okay. Can't deny the county commissioner or the Ford Pinellas board member.
Out of curiosity, is there one location where the ITS system will educate our community of what is already implemented and what hasn't been implemented, so they can kind of see where the progression, like 113th is, that you said that's not there yet, but at the same time, how does your department figure out what roads to correct through the technology system? And do you have a location where a community can give an input of problems at one location, like a website or anything like that, so we can educate our community?
Sure. Okay. Relative to areas where we've implemented it, where we've seen success, I think the three that Whit mentioned are several of the ones that we have done testing. the before and after, and we've seen definite improvements. Those are State Road 580 in the Dunedin area was the first one we did. 66th Street, East Bay, West Bay was one where we installed it and saw significant improvements. So, but again, every time that we've done an install, we go out and we run what we call a before-after study. What was the improvement? And over the entire implementation, we've averaged about a 13% reduction in travel time. So might not seem like a lot, but when that gets applied to hundreds of thousands of vehicles saving a small amount of gas, it does add up in a lot of savings. So the areas that we still need to finish installs, I'm not sure how best to present that. We can go ahead and put something on the Pinellas County website, a map that shows where it is and where it's not. We do keep that. We present it to the MPO usually on an annual basis, where it's installed, where we're doing construction, and where we're doing design and implementation next. So, but over the next 3 years, based on the construction we have right now and the construction that's in design, we should be completed with all the major arterials that we have in the county. What was the other question that you had? Oh, thank you. Our department is available anytime that you have a question or a comment about a traffic signal. One of the things that we try and let everybody know is please direct any comments that you get relative to traffic to us. It helps us talk to the person that's actually having the problem to be able to figure out how to fix it. One of the things that the system has is actually CCTV cameras that we have out in the street where we can actually, if somebody calls us, we can actually look at the signal while they're on the phone and actually walk through and see what the issue is. That number that anybody can call is our traffic control center. It's area code 727-464-8926.
All right, let's go to Commissioner Long. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for letting me offer a couple of suggestions. I'd like to follow up on some of the comments made by my colleague, Commissioner Eggers. None of the input that I've heard this morning has talked about a significant issue for those of us, especially that live in Pinellas County, because we're an island on an island. And if we can't figure out a way to solve our transportation issues that take us off of this peninsula in the event of a hurricane or some other unforeseen disaster on the making, we're going to be in serious, serious trouble. And so while we don't blink an eye at spending millions and millions of dollars on baseball stadiums, aquariums, museums, and any other glitzy thing that makes us feel good, we have a real pushback on taking some of those bed tax dollars to try to solve a real public health and safety need for this county and our region, and that's transportation. So I've never heard anyone in all the different boards that I sit on talk about how much do we need and how much is enough. And if you were to take a piece of this, a piece of that, sales tax, bed tax, you know, all the different options we've talked about this morning, and you figured out what the state match on that would be and the federal match on that would be, not to mention the private partnerships that could come to the table, what does that all add up to? And what could we do with it? I've never wrapped my head around that exercise to figure out what that number really, really is. So I think there might be some worthwhile mental power put to that question. What is our need in terms of dollars? And how do we begin to attack that? That's what I think our citizens want to know. And have we looked at all the current revenue sources we already have to see if, because we've been spending things that way for the last 25 or 50 years, is that still the right way and the right place to be putting our money, given all the technologies that have come on board? I think it's worth having that discussion.
All right, thank you very much. All right, that was very helpful. We're now back on schedule for lunch. and that was good discussion. So we'll have our panel discussion start at 11:40.
Excellent. I think we had a marvelous morning discussion, and right now I want to bring up a special group of panelists that are really champions for transportation throughout the county and are going to be the voices of our effort, I think, going forward. So we already have Mayor of our largest city, Mayor Kriseman, and then joining us, Jillian Bandis is from the private sector chair of the Transportation Committee at the St. Petersburg Chamber. And coming up now is Darryl Henderson. He's the vice president for governmental affairs for the Clearwater Regional Chamber. And then our county commission chair, Karen Seel. So this is the group that whose opinion matters to the general public and the business community, and really have been involved in transportation for decades. And we really appreciate their leadership, and we wanted to get their voice and their response to what we've talked about this morning. And with that, I want to just have each of you, we'll go down the line here, we'll start with Darryl, but have each of you share your vision for Pinellas County's transportation future. And I'm thinking in terms of, I think you've all been to a collaborative lab before at St. Petersburg College, and they try to look at what are the headlines, 10 years down the road, what is it that we're bragging about on our transportation future? Darryl?
Well, let me start off in interest of full disclosure. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. My father drove the B-49 bus in Brooklyn for 25 years. So I have a lot of experience with transit. That said, from the perspective of the business community, I think what their vision is being able to create access for everyone to be able to score good jobs, to be able to afford to live in Pinellas County. One of the problems our business partners tell us is that when they recruit talent, couple of concerns that they have. One is transit, because a lot of their recruits, 20s, 30s, maybe young children, maybe not, are telling them that they don't want to buy a house with a picket fence. They don't want to own cars. They are looking for communities, walkable communities, where they can work, grocery shop, go to a museum, all within walking distance. That's what the young people today are looking for. Not only that, but the business community, the companies that we hope to bring to Florida, express concern not only for transit, but also for things like education, because they don't want to bring their young children into a community where the public education system is not quite what it should be. So along with transit, that's another big concern. So the vision, I think, for business is the connectivity of the entire county, the connectivity of the region, and the opportunity to keep talent in Tampa Bay instead of having to recruit it.
Good, good. Jillian?
Thank you. I'm a third-generation contractor in Pinellas County. We do commercial projects. And the joke in my family is that my grandfather worked on US 19, and my father worked on US 19, and I can work on US 19. And my hope is, we have one on the way, that my future children will not work on US 19, because that's an ongoing project that we know will never get fixed. And so in order to change the priorities in our county, we need to change the funding mechanisms. Commissioner Long is right. We need to have a bunch of different types of intermodal transit. We need to have different allocations for the funding sources, flowing different ways, specifically with the hospitality tax, the tourist tax. It's a crime that it can't be allocated in different ways. The gas tax is sort of ripe for increasing. County funding mechanisms are very important. And other mechanisms like tolling or having different kinds of, the grants, having federal grants come in and do infrastructure improvements through non-FTA routes is going to be crucial if we're going to fund these kinds of priorities. I also have a vision that our zoning catches up with our transportation needs. I recently built a house in St. Pete. I was legally prohibited from building a townhouse there, building a double lot. Me and my husband would have been very happy living in a smaller home, but we were not allowed to do it. We're 9 blocks from Central Avenue. That needs to change if we're going to have transportation and housing that reflects the needs of our population. So I think there's been a lot of good discussion here today, and my hope is that in 10 or 20 years that we're having a totally different discussion, because what we're doing right now really isn't working.
Excellent.
I'm going to take this from a historic perspective, and since I've been on the County Commission since 1999, I believe that US 19 will be finished and done, and we will not have to address that in the future as far as funding. So we've been a road-centric county. We've used federal funds, state funds, and penny for Pinellas to improve our road network. We are getting the Roosevelt connector and the Bayside connector finished as a tolling road with free at-grade street-level roads underneath it. We will be looking at the bus rapid transit project for the 41 miles through Hillsborough County to Pinellas and Pasco. That offers some opportunity as well. Okay, so I meant to go from a historic perspective first. So traffic signals, we adopted in 2005 a funding source with a gas tax just devoted to traffic signals. While they're not perfect, we are making progress. We've changed the decision structure, and we streamlined and aligned land use planning and transportation with the merger of the Pinellas Planning Council and the Metropolitan Planning Organization forming Forward Pinellas. We also did we started the Transportation Management Area, the Tampa Bay TMA, which is a regional body. TBARTA happened, that's a regional body. We had Greenlight Pinellas, a plan that failed for sales tax in 2014. And so as we start to move forward, we really have to think about innovation and aligning true resources with true needs. I go back, and I hate to criticize Greenlight Pinellas because I was center and front along with my other commissioners. But since it didn't pass, and one of the things we said was, and forgive me, my PSTA friends, that the sky would fall down and bus routes would be cut dramatically, and this would be a problem. Well, they haven't been cut dramatically. They've been cut some, and they've been realigned, and so on. But we have to be honest in our presentations and in our asks and our needs. We have to be honest in looking at all the funding sources and understanding what can be used for operations and maintenance and what can be used for capital. And we truly have to align those to address the future. But again, I go back to since the light rail failed, maybe that's a good thing. We have the opportunity to be ahead of the curve this time and really do something extremely innovative that does connect multiple modalities and really prepares for the future for Pinellas County.
Mayor, your thoughts? What's our future look like?
So I like to analogize, and I'm going to start off my comments by doing one right here. To me, when we talk about mitigating the impact on climate change and reducing our carbon footprint, I think we have to look at multiple methods to do that. It can't all just be solar. I think the same goes for transportation. If we try and say our whole solution to transportation is light rail, or our whole solution to transportation is BRT, we're not going to solve the problem. I think it's going to take multiple technologies that are implemented differently for us to really solve the needs of this county and our region when it comes to transportation. You know, whether it's BRT, it's light rail, it's elevated aerial transit, it's e-scooters, it's complete streets, all of those things have a purpose and can have an impact. And some of them are better at first mile, last mile. Some of them are going to be more appropriate for getting us across the bay. I mean, my vision, and we've heard a lot about high-speed rail, thankfully, finally, that it looks like we're going to get it, which we've already should have had, but nevertheless. But we need to connect from downtown Tampa to West Shore to Carillon to downtown St. Petersburg to Clearwater Beach. All those areas have got to be connected, and then from those areas where we have multimodal stations, we then branch out into, for example, in St. Pete, going down 34th Street and 22nd Street, or 4th Street North in 16th Street and out to the west side with different technologies, because light rail doesn't make sense in those. And so we have to look at what makes the most sense from the technologies we have available to us, pair them up with the areas we're trying to connect people to, and look across the board at what we're doing in order to make it work.
Terrific. Well, we spent the morning talking about funding alternatives, and we know that Hillsborough County passed their referendum, and just wanted to have each of you kind of provide your take on the need for funding and what's the best pathway moving forward. And I'll start with Jillian this time, and we'll go through the cycle again.
I think there's a real opportunity for Pinellas County to step up in the way that Hillsborough County did. I think that due to the past attempts at getting funding passed in our county, that the time is ripe to move forward with another referendum, and it's kind of a groundswell of public support for that referendum. It's really important to play the ground game well. So starting out with the right messaging and starting out with the right policy proposals is important for getting it through. I think that was largely the reason for Hillsborough County's success, and will be the reason for Hillsborough County's success after this lawsuit. And I think there is enough support in the business community for it to make it happen. I think there is definitely kind of that base that understands the benefits of transportation in our community. And at least in South County, we are ready to go and hoping to follow that model.
Karen?
Well, I tend to concur. I knew once the sales tax passed, whether it was in our county first or in Hillsborough County, we would all be envious and wanting to be in the same place. You know, the beauty of the sales tax is, again, our tourists pay about 30% of it. Plus also, it raises a significant amount of money that can be used for both capital and operations and maintenance. If we're really wise, we'd be looking at that best source to do our funding. I think why Hillsborough succeeded was, I don't know whether Tom Kennedy's still in the room. Is he still here? This was kind of, he and I, after working on Greenlight Pinellas, talked about the fact that we did not do a good enough job of grassroots. And we really didn't involve the community enough in our plans so that we really had something that they could support. I think Hillsborough did a better job in that. Plus, as Jillian just indicated, the business community now is ready to support it. The business community was huge in Hillsborough. Yes. They were the ones who raised the money to support the referendum, and I am sure that's to a great reason why it succeeded. They had enough money to really publicize it and to really reach out to the voters. The interesting thing I believe about it was I'm not sure their plan was as detailed as ours was when we did Greenlight Pinellas. And that puzzles me in the whole scheme of things, because you think that the voters want to know exactly what they're voting for. But by doing a percentage split of transit versus, you know, following the MPO's plan in Hillsborough, maybe it's something we should look at. So anyway, I'm certainly open to the idea of a referendum. It does take, of course, the county commission approving the ability to put that on the ballot. But they're almost all here in the room, I think.
Mayor?
Yeah, I'm going to try not to repeat what's been said too much, but I think, you know, I would agree. It was the business community and it was a grassroots effort in Hillsborough versus government, which was more of what it was when we did Green Light. The other piece of it that I think was really important, we talked a little bit about this at our table, is we didn't do a very good job of explaining why everyone throughout the county would benefit. We really kind of focused in on one thing. We didn't get into the broader issues of quality of life and jobs and housing and equity. And all of those things are impacted when you have good mass transit. And that impacts everybody throughout the county in different ways, but it still impacts them. Whereas what we kind of put forth really focused on one thing, and people couldn't see the benefit necessarily of that. I do think that sales tax is the way to go. It will generate the most money. I have a lot of concerns about talking about going first with something like a gas tax, which we know is going to continue to decrease as vehicles continue to get more efficient. And whether if we implemented a gas tax first and then tried to go to a sales tax, we undercut the success of potentially getting that sales tax to go through. You know, the TDC there is the ability now to go after some of that funding. And yeah, I think, again, we have to tread carefully if we're going to go out to a referendum, that we don't do something in the short term that undercuts our long-term benefit.
Darryl?
Well, I don't think I could make a comment without repeating something. But to follow up on Mayor Kriseman's point, I would say that the climate in the business community is a lot different than it was 5 years ago. There seems to be more appetite for the types of variety of funding that we've been discussing. I would caution, though, because I represent the business community, you know, sales tax, I don't know. But I will tell you this. Businesses are in the business of making money. They want to make profit. And in order to invest, they want to see what the return will be on their investment. I get a little nervous when I hear the term public-private partnership thrown about, because unless you get a Richard Branson in the room who's able to buy a train system, you're not going to really get... Is that my gong?
Big band here. Brexit passed.
I know. At least it didn't gong 12 times. Right? When we talk about public-private partnerships, business people get nervous because investing in what business considers to be infrastructure is not what they want to do. However, we've seen in the past couple of years where, not just here but in other communities around the country, when they see a community taking steps to improve infrastructure, like bringing in robust transit, you get interest from companies like Amazon and Google. And I think that's what we should keep in mind when we talk about transit funding and we talk about approaching the business community. Because a lot of our businesses here, especially in Pinellas County, are smaller businesses. We had a conference here at St. Petersburg College back in October where we talked to a bunch of manufacturers. Dr. Williams was good enough to invite the business community, Pinellas Technical College, and some of the manufacturers in the area. And one of the things the manufacturers told us was they have trouble keeping workers because these folks can't get back and forth to work. One of the owners looked at me and said, I'm thinking about doing a campaign somewhere up in the Rust Belt of the Midwest, because you have folks up there where the company's moved out of town, they have all the skill sets that are required, but there's no work up there. But there's work here. The problem for us in Pinellas County is, if that happens, what about the people here who need jobs? What about the people here who could come to St. Pete College, do a workforce development program for 12 to 18 months and be ready for the workforce? So when we talk about the business community investing, the business community is all for this, but we have to engage them at a level that we probably haven't before.
Good point. Our next question, we're taking a look at what is the biggest challenge we face in improving our transportation future. What barrier is out there that really stands out? What's standing in our way of accomplishing everything we've talked about this morning? And I'll start with you, Karen, this time.
I don't think there really is a huge challenge. I think it's just really coming together and creating, as I mentioned, a honest and a realistic plan along with honest and realistic funding. And we have the talent. We have great elected officials, I think, throughout the cities and the county. And I think it's just a matter of sitting down and creating that and then implementing it.
Mayor, your thoughts?
So when we did the survey, and I don't remember which slide it was, but one of the things that came in last was neighborhoods and connecting locally came in last. And Commissioner Welch and I were kind of talking about this, and we thought it was fascinating because it came in last because the people in this room have a different understanding of transit and transit needs, I think. But if you asked the folks who will vote on the referendum, that may be the thing that they rank number one. And so the challenge is to get them to understand why all of us in this room, didn't rank that our number one, but had it ranked toward the bottom, if not the bottom. Because ultimately, if they don't agree, the referendum still isn't going to pass if we bring another one.
Interesting. Darryl?
Well, respectfully, Commissioner, I'm going to disagree. I think we have a huge challenge here. And we talked about this at our table this morning. As I see it, the largest challenge we have is getting the region together, getting the 3 counties together, sitting down at the table and working out a regional plan. One of the hesitations the business community has is that Hillsborough and Pinellas and Pasco don't talk to each other. Again, I'll go back to my experience in New York City. You know, you have the New Jersey Transit, you have the New York City Transit Authority, you have SEPTA from Philadelphia, you have Amtrak, and they all figured out how to get along. So I think we have to start with understanding and getting everyone to understand at the table that this is a regional issue. That if we are going to compete economically with other regions of comparable size in the country, we have to get it together when it comes to transit.
Good, good. Jillian?
I would echo Darryl's comments. The fact that we can't have a tri-county MPO is a huge deal. And I'm encouraged by the recent actions of T-BARTA. I think they've taken some steps in the right direction, but so much more is needed to really get the funding mechanisms right. I would also point out there's some pretty big cultural factors that are limiting. So getting away from the one rider per car, single trip mentality is not just a public policy issue, but it's also kind of something that we have to talk about as a community and learn to accept and learn to accommodate. I try to do this by riding my bike as much as I can, and I've taken a few bus trips. I'm going to take more, I promise, Brad. But getting all of our friends and our families on the bus, so to say, to ride it and to experience what it's like to not drive in a car is a really critical piece for a county as dense as ours is. And to kind of try and dispel some of those mindsets about, I heard recently that, I would never ride a bike to a business meeting. Well, I've ridden my bike tons of times to business meetings, and I hope I can do it more. It's hot outside, but this is where we live, and we can accommodate, we can change. So changing those mentalities is a pretty big deal.
It is. Okay.
I do want to echo Darryl and Jillian. I was thinking more of my county hat when I commented, but I agree. The regional cooperation is very daunting and very challenging. I can tell you that I worked on consolidating the MPOs back in 2010. We thought we had a done deal, and then it all fell apart. So that being said, I still applaud Pinellas County because we are a peninsula on a peninsula, but we do look towards knowing that we have to be regional. And so I thank everyone in the room for taking that attitude and for trying to make a difference. I just urge you, if you can reach out to the different elected officials and Hillsborough as well as Pasco, or find your friends in those counties to contact them, perhaps they'll start to get the message that we really do have to think regionally and address some of these answers.
Well, Mayor, I think we'll start you first on the next round, and it really does relate exactly to this regional issue. There's a lot of differing perspectives on how we ought to do regional, and especially with groups outside this county. But how would better regional transportation affect Pinellas County, its residents, its businesses, if we were able to accomplish this? What benefits do you see?
I've gone on a couple trade missions with members of the Hillsborough County Commission, Mayor of Tampa, and we talk about the region when we're out meeting with business groups, and when we're trying to recruit those same folks to consider us as far as relocating their business or doing an expansion. And it's a challenge when we get to the question about transportation, because they want to know how easy is it to get around? Will they be able to attract the talent that they want, that doesn't want to have to, as has been said by Darryl, want to have to own a car, pay the insurance and the car payments? And so from an economic development standpoint, having a robust regional transit system would make a huge difference. I mean, Mayor Buckhorn and I, Mayor Kretikis, we all say this all the time. If a business locates in Tampa, for example, in Pinellas County, we're going to benefit from that, even if they haven't located in Pinellas County, because we know that a percentage of those employees are going to live in our county or in our cities. They're certainly going to come across the bay and spend their money here. Hillsborough and Mayor Buckhorn know the same thing, and that's why we are looking at it from that perspective. We have had a few isolated successes where we have worked together. Ferry is a great example of where, Pinellas County, Hillsborough, Tampa, and St. Pete have all worked together to do something on transit. But then on the flip side, you see something like the premium transit that DOT is working with all of us on, and Pinellas County and St. Pete and a number of other municipalities in our county have been very vocal in their support. Pasco counties have been vocal in their support. But for some reason, Hillsborough County has not been. And that's a problem. We've got to get everybody on the same page, even if it doesn't get to where ideally they would like to be, which I think is part of the problem. You've got to start, because if you don't at least start, you're never getting there.
True. Darryl, your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to put on my tourism business hat for a moment. In Pinellas County, I think it's Pinellas County, the #2 tourist origin destination is New York City, my hometown. As of 2017, roughly 57% of the residents of the 5 boroughs of New York City do not own cars, for obvious reasons. I remember when I was working in New York and I had to go on business trips, the last thing I did when I got off a plane in a strange city was rent a car. Because I'm from New York. I'm used to riding the subway. I'm looking for a bus. I'm looking for some form of public transportation to get me from the airport to the hotel. We already live in the best place in the country. Our tourism numbers at Clearwater Beach are rising every year. Once again, #1 beach in the nation. Our number of international tourists as well continues to grow annually. Think of the message it will send when the Super Bowl gets here in 2021 and people are able to see that we've made significant steps with respect to transit. Think about what it'll do for our region when Virgin Brightline gets here in 2024. And we have figured out a way, as the mayor referenced, to connect all the areas of the entire region. People come here because we have the best beaches in the nation. This is a great place to come on vacation. It's a great place to live. Think about how much better it will be, how much more talent we will attract if, as we all see, we do what these young professionals want in their communities, walkable communities, places where they can, take a bus, take a rail, take whatever to get to where they want to go and not have to own a car.
Terrific. Jillian, what do you think?
There's a lot of people in this room who have long histories with trying to organize the MPOs in a better way than they are now. So I will kind of leave it to the experts here, but I will say that we're not special. So many other regional areas have done this. There have been big cities that have been located close together that learn how to work with one another. And we can do it too. It's not that far off. I feel like kind of with the transit referendum, there's also a groundswell. And maybe the future is closer than we think. I mean, I hope it is. You know, I know my employees drive an hour and 20 minutes because they can't afford to live in Pinellas County. And, you know, they're making reasonable incomes. It's just an issue of housing costs and transportation costs. So we can fix it. I mean, this is an achievable goal.
I concur with all said. I don't think I have anything new to add to it. But again, you know, to get to where we're going to go, we have to be having that interaction with our sister counties and to really be pushing this economic development piece and pushing this agenda that we have to have a cooperative and fundable and completed transportation network.
The next one I want to look at is what are we doing right? What is working regionally, either in transportation or if there's another area where you can point to that we can learn from. What are we doing right in regional transportation issues or regional issues overall? Darryl?
Having this conversation today, I think, is the best thing we can do. Let's continue this conversation. Let's, as we move forward, bring more of the business community to the table. Some of these folks have great ideas about how to fund huge projects. You know, one of my colleagues at the Clearwater Chamber, Bruce Rector, is here. They do public projects all over the nation for sports facilities and sports facility management. So the business community can be a great partner as we go forward.
Jillian?
I think we're doing our trails right. I think we've done really well with the Pinellas Trail. I love riding on it. I think we're moving in the right direction with complete streets, particularly in my city, in St. Petersburg. And I think we have a really outstanding public staff at PSTA, at Fort Pinellas. I've had the good fortune to get to know some of these individuals personally. And it is true that the quality of your public services is reflective of the quality of our government staff. And so we have professionals who are second to none here in our county. And if anyone's going to get it done, they will.
I think there's always optimism in Pinellas County, and that is a treasure that we have. I think that you have, as already mentioned, extremely dedicated staff as well as elected officials across this county that want to make things work and are dedicated to making things work. And I feel like we have done some great things. I gave you a sense of history, and we've gone up from our roads to traffic signals to decision structure to aligning land use and transportation planning to, you know, creating Forward Pinellas, et cetera. We're poised at this point to really be able, I think, to finally achieve some of the great things that we need to do.
Echoing the comments, I think the commitment of government staffers, of the elected officials of the business community is obviously it's nothing's going to happen unless those pieces are all there, and I think they are. But as a great example of doing something right, the ferry I think is a great example where four governments all came together and said, let's try something. 2 years ago we tried the pilot, and we're doing it again this year, and numbers thus far, the response from the public is we're ahead of the goals that we set, and those goals were to increase the ridership, and if it continues, it's going to finish with numbers far beyond what we anticipated. I think we're all kind of catching up, but are doing a better job on things like complete streets now. And this county, I think, has really been a leader when it comes to the trail system. And, you know, everything that we can do to encourage people to use alternative means of transit is a good thing, and certainly having a robust trail system that is envied by a lot of folks from not just outside the Tampa Bay area, but around the country that have seen it is a pretty good thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. I think particularly with the ferry. It's a great example of we've got to keep trying and learning from, an iterative approach, because we realize now, and I think we knew ahead of time, you can't do a commuter service with one boat, but you can do an opportunity for the tourists and the residents to enjoy that entertainment connection between the two towns. And so, and likewise, we can't have a commuter line, a bus line with only a bus every hour. It's the same concept. We just have to learn from our pilots and continue to iteratively improve things, but definitely learn and alter your approach every year instead of trying the same thing. So appreciate what St. Pete has done in that leadership. I have one more question that we've put together ahead of time, and I do want to encourage you, if you haven't done so already, to fill out your questions for the panel and get them over here to Haley, and then we'll go forth with that. Next, I'm going to start with Jillian again, and just, is there a missing link? Is there something either we haven't talked about so far, or some critical element that you think is a linchpin in getting all of this done? Or even is there a missing element, a link between two transportation systems that we needed to go? But really what jumps into your mind as a missing component of this transportation discussion?
Ooh, a silver bullet.
Yeah, that would be nice.
I really want to connect to Brightline. I think that is going to be so critical, and the fact that they're getting out of the ground so quickly is just awe-inspiring. I mean, I wish we could pull it off this quickly in the public sector as well. Getting there is going to be so important if we're going to keep pace with our surrounding cities. In terms of one thing to get right, I mean, more money's nice, but I think also having kind of the community support for spending those revenue sources appropriately is important. I echo Darryl's comments about, what are we going to get for any kind of increased revenue or taxation? And so we need more forums like this to do it in smart ways. And I think understanding the long-term transportation plan that's going to be put forward in 2019 and having real investment from the community in that plan so we can designate funding appropriately is very critical. Other than that, I don't know what kind of one thing you could possibly do. It's a whole, conglomeration of issues.
It's hard work.
I'm going to address this kind of in a different way. In two ways. One is, it's been mentioned today, but we do have some legislative constraints. The County Commission has had on its legislative agenda for years gas tax indexing, and it has not gone anywhere. If you look at the charts, it would increase our money more than adding 5 more cents. And so we really need to be hopeful and ever present, trying to persuade our legislative delegation to allow counties home rule, and the home rule to implement, even if it's in our own county, some of these things. We, as a county commission, I recently gave Mr. Burton some other ideas that we could look at from the county commission standpoint. A transportation utility tax is used in the state of Oregon. And so it's similar to a stormwater fee and assessment per property, which might be better than using a gas tax. The county commission has never put into place their ability to use the utility tax and a franchise fee within the unincorporated area. We looked at it years ago, but we haven't looked at it since. We fund indigent health care from our property taxes. We could be moving that to a dedicated millage within the Department of Health and release some millage for the county to use for our operations and maintenance costs for our own good. We could, as Clearwater, and I always remember this, having started on the Clearwater City Commission in 1996, they have a dedicated millage just for road resurfacing. And it is by ordinance, but has stayed there for years and years, so that I would venture to guess, and not to be critical of other cities, but Clearwater's roads are in good shape. And it's because they had the courage, long before I got there on the Clearwater Commission, to dedicate a millage just to that. We could be looking at an independent taxing district, which would have to go to a referendum. Maybe it would be for transportation. So there are other options that the county commission could really look at that could do this. Now, I do want to address, since it's been mentioned today, the tourist development tax. We have a great tourist development council, and they, along with the county commission, agreed to put into place another 1 cent tax on the tourists several years ago. And then it was subsequently agreed upon to do a 60-40 split, 60% for marketing administration and 40% for capital projects. They are still willing to continue in that regard and look at the transportation option, but they'd like it to be within that 40%. And I think that's realistic. We have about almost $17 million projected to come in per year to that tax. And I think we have to make a hard decision, both the Tourist Development Council as well as the County Commission, how to align the museum requests, how to align the Phillies requests, how to align, if we look at the Rays requests for money, along with our transportation needs. They are all capital requests. And what also has to be mentioned is you cannot use that bed tax for operations and maintenance. And it can only be used for 70% of the funding of a capital project. And there's other parameters on it as well. But I really wanted to straighten out the record on that today, at least from, and we just had my first Tourist Development Council meeting this past week, and we will be bringing forward a robust discussion about this potential for the bed tax in the future. And, but I just kind of wanted to put that out there since it's been mentioned today. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Mayor, missing link?
So I don't have as much concern about our ability to come together as a county and put together a robust plan for transit. I'm confident we can do that and utilize all the various technologies available to connect the county up and then interconnect it with the region and go across the bay. So to me, the missing link is really the money. It's really the funding of that plan, because we can come up with the best plan that's ever been created, but if we can't fund it, it doesn't matter. And so there's been a lot of talk about the funding today, and as there should be. And it's really, I think, us kind of settling in on what's the best way to get us to where we need to go from a funding perspective, and then just put the plan together. And in some ways, that's kind of the easy part.
Terrific. Darryl, your thoughts?
And I agree with you, Mayor. That is the easy part. I want to talk a little bit about something that might be a little more difficult. And that is, we as a community need to change the way we look at transit. I like the phrase economic infrastructure investment. Okay, when Jeff Bezos founded Amazon, their shareholders understood that for the first 3 to 5 years, they weren't going to make a dime of profit. But everyone understood that there was a payout at the end. I'm not sure the New York City Transit Authority has ever turned a profit. And nobody cares. Because the New York City Transit Authority, along with New Jersey Transit and SEPTA and Amtrak, are able to bring 10 million people in and out of the city of New York every single day. If we look at transit as an investment in the community, in the region, we can economically transform this region within 5 to 10 years, because we will make it attractive for companies to move their operations here. We will make it attractive for sports teams to stay here. We will make it attractive for all these other things that we're looking for as far as economic development in this region. But we have to look at transit as an investment, just the way we are supposed to look at education as an investment.
Terrific. Well, we've now got some questions from the audience, and I'll just open this to anyone on the panel that has an interest in responding. First question is, why aren't current transit users a voice of improvement, and how can we get them to be advocates? How can we learn from those who are currently invested in the public transit system? Any ideas?
Well, I'm not on the PSTA board, but I do believe that they receive quite a bit of input from their riders. And don't you have a transit advisors committee? That's what I thought. And so I do believe they do receive some good feedback, but there's always room for more from everyone.
Terrific. Next question is, please elaborate on how zoning and land use effects can be used to accommodate transportation.
Completely. And I thought Matt Spohr, we had a really robust discussion at he's the city manager for Safety Harbor. And we really, and Jillian touched on it too, we really have to rethink about the millennials here. In that, when we talk about that 2045, our communities are going to look entirely different by that point in time. We're going to be having folks who don't want a car, folks who want to be able to live, work, and play in their neighborhood. They may want more local connections right in their area, but they're going to still want that regional connection if they're going over to work in Hillsborough County. So I think we really have to, we've talked about technology, we've talked about adaptation and resiliency, but I think, and that all has to be factored into how the millennials are going to want to live in Pinellas County.
I don't think we have to wait till 2045 for that. All you have to do is drive down to St. Petersburg. Listen, in the business community, one of the things we're having to come to terms with is that the folks coming out of college or the folks coming out of business school, they are looking at their careers very, very differently than we did. When we graduated college, we looked for, okay, let me look for a job, figure out what career I'm going to do, and then if that perfect job is in Denver, then I'm going to Denver. Young people today are not doing that. Young people today are graduating from college and business school and law school, and they are looking around the country for the community that they want to live in. And they look at things like walkability, they look at things like quality of life, they look at things like transit, and they are making their career decisions based on where they want to live. And until we accept that and make changes in our community to make it attractive to these people, that will continue to be an issue.
That's true. Mayor?
Density, density, density. Yeah. You know, as we look at, in St. Pete as a city that's really built out, and there's not a whole lot of land, we're going to continue to grow through density. And so where we grow and where that density is really got to be where your hubs for transit are located. You know, we look at the Tropicana Field site where we have the 86 acres. I mean, we're talking about potentially 3 million square feet of housing that may take place there. We're talking about significant office that may take place and occur on that site. And so whatever we do, when we're laying out our plan for what our future transit program is going to look like throughout the county, we have to be able to target those areas where the greatest concentration of growth from both office and residential occur, and we have to make sure that they are connected.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a politics question. I mean, yes, to what Mayor Kriseman and Commissioner Seel said, but I was having this conversation with Carl Nurse, who's spent a lot of time working on housing in St. Pete, and all of the city staff get it. All of the county commissioners get it. All of the, the city councilmen and women get it. The mayor gets it. We all get it. It's a political will. I mean, just pushing the needle a little farther to where it finally becomes reality is all it's going to take. And so I think this is why this community activism stuff is important, because we recognize that the policy outcomes are there waiting to be implemented. It's just a matter of time and kind of wherewithal.
Terrific. One element that hasn't been discussed here today is our other bus system, the public schools. And how does that relate to our transit system and our transportation system in general? How do we get kids back and forth to school in a better way? Darryl, you had something?
I moved down here from, New Jersey is where I owned my last house. And one of the things that surprised me greatly about this community, first day I went to work, I was driving down the street and I saw a bunch of high school students getting on a bus, a school bus. That doesn't happen in New York. The transit system is so robust. From the time I was in the 5th grade, I was on a public bus by myself with a little bus pass going to school. What that will do, when you take a lot of the school buses off the road, it reduces the traffic in the morning, it reduces childhood fatalities crossing the streets, it reduces a lot of things. So I think that's something as a community we should look at.
Any other? Maybe get them to the table for the discussion.
I think that's a perfect place for PSTA to try to make some policy changes with the school board. I mean, we've looked at it before from a county commission perspective, and we've gotten pushback that it's not legal. And I think I would encourage that there be a better discussion with the school system and see if there's a way to make that change.
Terrific. The last two questions kind of go together. How can we create a vehicle to move this transit effort forward? And there's been plenty of talk over the past 30 years. When we can have a proper vote for funding and get mass transit system in Pinellas County? What do you think? What's the timing and what's our opportunity here to take that next step?
We need a Jeff Vinnick to pay for the referendum costs.
Amen. And I think we could convince Jeff that we are an important submarket of what he's trying to accomplish.
Mike,
I mean, he's trying to create St. Petersburg.
You should take that on, yeah.
I think we can, because, yeah, he's trying to recreate St. Petersburg in Tampa from the ground up. I mean, if you listen to everything he says about his development, you're basically describing St. Pete as it is today. And he's trying to create it going forward. But I think we need to find a way, and he did make a huge difference in the Hillsborough referendum. And I think people trust him. People know that, if he says we need it, we need it. And I think it applies here as well as on the Hillsborough side. But yeah, any other idea? And what about timing? Do you think there's a good time to go forward with this back to the referendum?
Yesterday.
Yesterday.
From a business perspective, from a fairly macro business perspective, we're getting left in the dust. Charlotte figured this out. Nashville figured this out. Seattle, Portland figured this out. Granted, those are they tend to be cities with one downtown, but we can't be the only community around this nation that has some of the challenges that we have. And I think it would be a good idea if we were to, I know that Forward did a benchmarking trip to Indianapolis not too long ago, but I think it would be a good idea if we called in transit professionals from cities that have had transit for a long time, talk to them, call in some of the folks from Charlotte or Nashville, some of the more recent. There are cities in the nation, for example, Kansas City is in 2 different states, but they figured it out somehow. So I think someone at our table said, it's not so bad that we're late to the game because we can get some expertise from others.
Anyone else?
I'm really wrestling with this because I would think this year would be the year. It's an off-election year. It's generally the people who support transit come out favorably. We have studied what has happened in other regions and have a sheet that shows when and where referendums have passed successfully. So we have that information to go from. If we wait till 2020, then we're in a presidential year. We did the vote in 2014 when we were still coming out of a recession. I cautioned against doing it in 2014 because I was afraid of it for that reason and really wanted to wait until 2015. So I'm nervous about waiting a whole lot longer because if we start to slip into a recession, we'll be back in the same place that we were before. When's the right time? When is the electorate going to support it? But if we are going to do it in 2019, we need to be ready in a month.
Yeah, and following up on that, the other problem that you have when you talk about pushing it out is you give the opponents greater opportunity to mobilize and message and defeat it. And if you look at the way it happened in Hillsborough, it happened quick. They didn't take 2 to 3 years to put their position together and take it to the voters. Having said all that, and I do think we ought to be looking at this year, I think it's incumbent on all of us, and the business community, by the way, really needs to step up to drive this thing. Again, it cannot be government that's driving it if it's going to happen this year. But having said all that, it's incumbent on all of us that are in elected office to continue to work to move our own communities and collectively our county forward in the ways that we can right now, and to look for opportunities to put different transit options or different transit modalities into place that we can now, and not wait, because if we're going to rely on a vote, we may not get any movement again at all, and look for opportunities for public-private partnerships.
Great. Well, I want to take the opportunity to thank the panel for spending this time with us and giving us their views, and thank you all for being here. I think if we're running out of time now, I'm going to turn it back over to Whit, but if you have any other questions, I believe these panelists will still be in the room. And with that, a little applause for our panel. Thank you.
No pressure, no pressure at all. So thank you all for that. What we're going to do now is, that was a little bit of a transition to talk about regional transportation. And some of the things that came up are, you know, how do we plan better? How do we make decisions better regionally? And so that's been the focus on the last year of a study to look at exactly what mechanisms make sense for the Tampa Bay area, especially for what we're calling the core MPOs in Pasco, Hillsborough, and Pinellas, to have shared decision making. And so I'm going to introduce our team from the consultants that were working on this study under the umbrella of TBARTA, the Tampa Bay Area Regional Transit Authority. This is a state-funded study. Frankly, the MPO directors went to the state of Florida and said, you know, it's not as simple as just merging your MPOs into one. From 3 counties. You got to think through all the implications and all the mechanisms, and let's look at what some other places in the country have done. So we asked for that study. We've had a great bit of work from the consultant team. So I'm going to introduce Scott Lane from Stantec and Jeff Kramer for the Center for Urban Transportation Research, who have been the lead investigators for this. And they're going to come and walk you through that process, but they're going to focus on the short-term and long-term recommendations of that study. And what's being handed out now is a summary of those recommendations on 11 by 17 sheet of paper. You might need a magnifying glass to read some of the text, but they'll walk you through and give you a good orientation to that. So come on up, guys. You may need to jump up or come around over here.
I've been doing.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's the last applause I anticipate the entire time I'm talking, but I appreciate it. I'm Scott Lane. I'm with Stantec Consulting. This is the 4th day I've been back here, and we've been doing presentations like this to the MPOs in Pasco and Hillsborough. And part of my presentation, I think, would like for me to at least touch on is some of the reception and input from those, your partners across and over the bay. What I want to do is just kind of go through the study pretty quickly. I'm going to even skip probably a few slides and let your questions direct me and get into more interesting stuff like recommendations. But for those of you that have participated in this study, I really appreciate it. Some of this you may have seen a little bit of, but we're going to try to move through it pretty expeditiously. But so first things first, this study is not about just merging the MPOs. Let me just say it one more time, because some of you weren't with me in Hillsborough on Tuesday night, where that seemed to be the modus operandi. This study was not about purely merging the MPOs. It is on the left-hand side of this slide what I was charged with doing, and Jeff Kramer with Cutter, invaluable co-manager. It was really thinking about what are the issues first, and then secondly, contemplating, okay, how do we maybe move forward on this, all the way up to, you know, what does, if we were to do it, a merge structure potentially look like? And when I get to the recommendations, I'll get into more detail. The study is now in its final phase. The first phase was very selfish for me. It was about collecting a lot of data and understanding the context and directions of the 3 core MPOs, Pasco, Pinellas, and Hillsborough, and their MPOs. What that really meant. I mean, what does regionalism mean here now? I mean, for example, hurricane comes, knock on wood, hopefully you won't get that for a little while again. But when it comes, we all respond, hopefully, more or less together. It is coordinated in some fashion. Water services, a major accomplishment, I think. You can pat yourselves on the back about how we look at water distribution and so forth. That happened with some nice cost benefits attached to it over the years. So there are certainly ways and examples of regionalism that way. There's also examples of regionalism that you have going on in transportation. I mean, as some people mentioned, I lost count of the number of things I was going to play off of from the panel up here. I keep on getting one on my head, then someone else would say something, I'm like, oh, that's better. I'm going to just gave up. But they all said great things up here. So there are good examples. Suncoast Trail, there's a lot of different examples of regionalism going on. Now, the MPOs do talk to each other. I can assure you of that. We've talked to them enough to know that. This study began way back in May 2017 with a workshop. We finished the third workshop at the end in October 29th, 2018 of this graphic. And in between, we did a lot of study to derive, 10 key topics we really kind of gear in on that helped us refine issues with regionalism. And then we also talked to 9 of your peer regions and MPOs around the country. A little more on that. Apologize for some of the text running over. These are the 10 topics we distilled. As you may know, it's not all children are loved equally maybe, but local versus regional decision making was huge. That was the one that kind of stood out. Regional revenue, the topic of today, to a degree, was certainly very important. Public involvement was also critical, because when you begin talking about regionalism, people's hackles in the back of their neck immediately stand up and they go, well, what about my local voice? And so those were all really important kinds of topics. So once we had the topics in our midst, we could go out and begin thinking about not just internally what that meant, but also externally with these 9 peers. And I don't want to go through all of these, but they're kind of interesting. Most of them are larger probably than any individual MPO here. Some of these are renowned, so like Metro in Portland. And by the way, the old joke amongst planner crews, and Whit may appreciate this, no one else, the old joke about Portland is they have 200 planners, 100 do things, another 100 go to conferences and talk about what the other 100 are doing, right? I mean, I can't go to one without, oh, it's Metro, okay, whatever. We talked to all of them. We didn't just talk to the MPO directors like Whit, but we also talked to some of their partners, because I was an MPO director, and if some Yahoo had talked to me about some best practices and asked me how things are going great. We really couldn't be doing any better. You should definitely work all for us. So we talked to their partners like transit operators or state DOTs to try to get a little more well-rounded perspective. We learned some things from these folks. So some of our recommendations I'll get into in a minute kind of built on the study management team, which was what we called our steering committee, that has met 11 times over this 15-month period. So kudos to Whit and his cadre of fellow study management team members. Some of you are sitting in here as well, so I know it's painful. This is our schedule very quickly, and so I will touch on this again at the end, won't belabor it here. We had the recommendations finally pop out at the last day of the year, on December 31st. These have been sent out to that steering committee I mentioned. I believe that they are now also up on the TBARTA website, and kudos to TBARTA. They were sort of my consultant, contract manager. Their role was logistics. They made sure things got paid on time, couldn't ask for more, and they resisted the temptation, you ding-dong, if you just thought about this, aren't you thinking about this? They didn't do that for me. They let me have my own rope to hang myself with, and that was a big part of this study. These folks are smart. I'm a consultant, right? So I normally do like long-range plans and corridor studies, all of this stuff you guys get into all over the country for MPOs. These are some of the best I've ever worked with. And I think if you ask a lot of people that know Whit and Beth, and I know John's a little bit newer, but him too soon enough, but they would agree with me. These are very good staffs, very good MPOs. Nothing you hear today should be misconstrued as saying that they aren't doing a very good job here for you. So with that. Third workshop in October. This stands to be potentially the most boring part of the presentation, so I will kind of let your questions make me go back to some of these slides. This was actually held in Hillsborough. The first 2 were held in Pinellas. So this one is in Hillsborough County. We tried to do some things with this one that were different than the first 2. By the time October rolled around, we kind of had an idea of the directions we were headed in. So we had some pretty specific questions. We try to create an atmosphere where that was conducive to getting answers or input on those specific questions. The other thing we did is a little bit different. We really tried to work with people to build sort of an atmosphere of inclusiveness and trust through this process rather than waiting for it to happen sometime later, and allow people to actually stand up, like I'm doing now, and say, this is a great idea, or that's a really dumb idea. And we had a panel up here like this with myself, the 3 MPO directors, and 2 other ones from Broward and Orlando to help answer questions and give a different, again, rounded perspective. So that was a little different for that workshop. And the animation is going to kill you and a little bit of text issues here. But so we had a full group presentation at the beginning. Some of you may have participated in this. We had a couple of breakouts that I'll go to in more detail, and then that full group kind of forum at the very end. This is the part you can't read in the handout. So this was 2 scenarios that we had one of the little breakout groups do. Everybody did all these breakouts, by the way, but this one was focused on looking at hypotheticals. So the trouble is, if I ask you about XYZ project here, and I won't name the XYZ project that you're probably thinking of, but if I did, you have baggage. I mean, you're going to think about what happened, you're going to think about your current opinion, what your neighbor said to you last night, whatever it is. And so we took them out of that and tried to give them a different hypothetical, totally imaginary, although these are 2 real geographic areas in the United States, and you get extra points if you can figure out what they are. If you participated in this thing, you cannot win. Of course, if you do win, you don't get anything anyway, so it doesn't matter. So we did get some good input from this. This was very detailed, and part of this was kind of letting people just talk through it. It wasn't necessarily a ton of input coming back to me or us, but we did kind of think about this and helped it, nuance some of our recommendations. Focus on process concerns was, I think, pretty good. That was the hope, that you didn't get wrapped up in how to find the answer. I mean, I don't know about Whit, but as an MPO director before, I always tried to find the answer. It's broken, I need to fix it. And so I try to get people out of that headspace and think, okay, no matter what the right answer is here in these little projects, these hypotheticals, what would make the difference? Would 1 or 2 or 3 MPOs help do something different? If you had a single Citizens Advisory Committee, helping to address these communities of concern, would that make a difference? So it was more about that process abilities rather than the actual solution. And it's difficult to get people away from that. You all are fixers. I will say that during a lot of discussions, they were booking the tables just like you are now. Each one had a facilitator. They type notes. It's available on the TBARTA website. A lot of the solutions in discussion were inclusive of regional and collaborative structures. Not necessarily merging again, but at least the idea that regional collaboration was really important to resolving some of these, or at least getting to an answer that could move things forward, regardless of the MPO structures sometimes. I'm not going to go through all these slides. I may come back to some depending on your questions, but some of the questions we asked about these scenarios, some people did talk about identifying representatives for each community of concern, what you may have heard as traditionally underserved communities, lower income, minority, et cetera. We also include these days more and more aged populations, mobility challenge, and so on. But anyway, no matter what they are, there would have to be some kind of mechanism in place to make sure those voices did not get lost. And that was a pretty good theme throughout some of this process. I am going to bang through some of these. Financing, we can come back to that since that is the topic here, obviously. So obtaining funding, I'll stop on the last one. Many times what we heard throughout this 15 months was, Scott, it doesn't matter what the structure looks like here, if it's 1 or 17 MPI, it's really about how do we best access financing to address some of these regional concerns and projects, okay? And so, got it, check. Another thing we heard occasionally was that we would do better or worse or something if there was 1 or 2 or 3 MPOs. And let me just assure you that at least from what we can see, direct funding changes, it's hard to find where that's going to change a whole lot one way or the other. Indirectly is a different story, and there's enough anecdotal discussions out there about large MPOs and their ability to wield authority within a state to light up another whole conference probably. But there is some thought, certainly, even before the study that is out there, that large MPOs can help fight for their rights, so to speak, with others in the state and with the state DOT more effectively. There's even some thought that MPOs are really, back in the early 70s, in some ways are created to help counterbalance the state DOT's powerful influence that was getting maybe a little bit out of hand, potentially. I hope no one FDOT's in here, don't blame me for this. It's in the internet somewhere. But helped to counterbalance that authority, particularly after the Interstate Highway Act and some of the damage that famously brought about. That became very important to people. Another exercise that everybody did was looking at questions, and you all have these clicker things in front of you, so I don't have to explain it. That's nice. One difference that we do when we do these things, we typically call on people after the responses and get them to, if they want to say, okay, why did you pick answer B or C or whatever? So from that, we were able to not just get, just the raw percentage answers, but we were also to get a little more detail about why that answer was important to them or made sense. Very high level glossing over many, many things, but sometimes people, we did see some support for a dues structure. If you have a regional body, and you've got several of those now, as someone else pointed out, I don't have to do that. You got to finance staff, you got to finance space, and so on. And so local dues was generally thought to be an okay way of doing that. An interesting question or series of questions was about deferring local projects for regional projects. This was curious and a deep part of the discussion because this really gets down into the local versus regional very directly. There was support for this as long as there was a pretty good rule structure set up for when's it my turn. You may defer a project that's important to your constituents and your people when they leave Pinellas, but sooner or later, preferably sooner, that project merry-go-round has to come out and it has to stop here in Pinellas too. So that was a lot of the discussion in a nutshell. Executive committee that was focused on just regional priorities and had some authority, conditional approval for that again, and I'll show you some of what I'm talking about. I'm going to skip some of this and you can see some of the answers. Here's one on top that's kind of important. So multi-county surcharge, a referendum to support regionally significant transportation projects. Pretty good response, 2/3. I think we heard some of the discussion up here kind of support that additional funding question. A little more mixed. Would you be willing to see an executive committee empowered to make a limited, I think it's supposed to be a narrowly defined set of decisions? Yeah, sort of, or no, sort of, and it depends upon the details. I mean, how is my voice heard within an executive committee? Again, how are projects decided? So a lot of or some of our recommendations in the draft that's out now banging around talk about decision-making structures and even what a regional project is. I mean, could we actually all in here agree what a regional project technically is? Sometimes yes, sometimes maybe no. So referring to handout. So this has been my week so far. I hope yours has been good too. So Fort Pinellas today, Hillsborough on Tuesday, and Pasco just yesterday. The text got a little bit funny, but so Whit, I think, wanted me to touch on at least what we've heard. It's the advantage of going last to get to hear what the other guys said about you. So in Hillsborough on Tuesday, I think it's very simple. I mean, they just passed the 1% referendum, as you all know. And once they get through this silly lawsuit thing, they'll start doing that. And they made no bones to me about, and others there, about where that money was to be spent on local projects. We say again, local projects, not regional cooperative, collaborative projects. That was the message we got. In fact, they think that referendum is actually, at least people that spoke there that night, thought it was really a referendum on that very thing, local before regional, just to let you know. I'm just a reporter, don't shoot me. There was a pretty good dialogue it's pretty similar and pretty themed, much focus on the merger question. There was 95% of our recommendations in this don't deal with merger. And even the one that does is kind of conditional itself, as you saw in some of the previous slides. But the entire focus in Hillsborough was about the merger, I would say, or 95% of it. In Pasco, and that was just yesterday morning, and this was the MPO. A little different, good questions there. Pasco is different from, all three MPOs are really different. Pasco is growing by leaps and bounds, I think is the proper phrase to use, and its infrastructure is not. So they understand this problem maybe a little bit more intimately because many of the people that start off for work every day in Pasco, some of them come here, some of them come to Hillsborough. And that is true in Pasco more than the other two counties or MPOs, I believe. So their perspective always understand perspective, is a little different from everybody else's. We'll see what you have to say about Pinellas. In front of you, at least one half of what's in front of you on one side, is a sheet that was handed out at the third workshop at the end of October. And there's recommendations there that they saw a little bit different. There are some boxes around those, and the recommendations on that are in the boxes survived to get into the draft that's now being reviewed by the MPOs and staff. Get some water real quick. And the text is a little small. So the better way, maybe, to look at the recommendations that were in those boxes is this. And so I think that a third of the world maybe is ambivalent, a third of the world wishes it moved a lot faster, and a third just wishes it wouldn't happen at all. But the recommendations are shown here. And MPOs, I won't get into this a whole lot, but they tend to devolve around decennial census periods, or revolve, hopefully revolve. And so our alignment was with that. So by 2023, the first, whatever that is, 8 or so recommendations should be worked on and hopefully at least modestly well underway to being completed. I will summarize some of these. There's a Team A leadership group now that is out there. We did not recommend yet another layer of regional something. We avoided that trap. You have what you need now. The issue that we saw and that we recommended fixing was that that group needs to have a level of responsibility and authority that's a little bit different than it is now, and increased and enhanced. Part of that authority would provide for a regional transportation plan that element would be initially belong to them. And they obviously would have to be agreed upon if the state and federal dollars are used by the MPOs too. Another thing that I think stands out to me a little bit that's different, and this came from some of our peer group interviews, is that we're recommending that state legislators serve on this leadership group, this refined or enhanced leadership group. In 2 of the MPOs we studied, that was the case, and they had voting state representatives on their MPO policy boards. A little different, not everybody does this. However, in both cases, they really liked it when we talked to them. In one case, they made no bones about it. They got increased funding because they had better connectivity to, in our case, Tallahassee, than they would have otherwise. Now, what you're thinking is, I really don't want that person that I'm thinking of right now to sit on my committee. But you got to get past that, okay? Is there longer term? You got to think longer term. So the concept is still good, hopefully. And then, of course, developing a regional collective funding strategy. Notice in this first batch, we don't use the M word. We don't use the emerge word. These are things that would probably need to happen anyway, many of them, if not all of them, before you really got into effectively a merger. I mean, someone could snap their fingers tomorrow and say, let's do it, and all this would get accelerated, right? But the second tier of recommendations at the bottom, the last 3 there, does focus on MPO policy board. If we see trends continuing to move the way they are now, we have 1 urbanized area already, but 3 MPOs, a little different. We have a lot of connectivity already in travel patterns, freight. You've heard some people up here talk about competitiveness. I won't get into that. There are people who are much more skilled than that than I am. I will tell you this, yes, all of your towns may compete against each other, but you compete against me. I come from Raleigh, and we know who we compete against. We know we compete against you guys, but it's okay. We lost Amazon too, don't feel bad. You know what, I have a home there, and I'm like, yeah, my home value had gone up, but I'm kind of glad that didn't happen. My traffic's already pretty bad. So 2 MPOs in Raleigh was one of our peers, actually. It wasn't my idea. It was the study management team's idea. Here's a story for you about where I come from. 2 MPOs side by side. Right square in the middle is the airport that everybody uses, and right square in the middle is this thing called the Research Triangle Park, which has a whole lot of employees and employers in it. A big draw, apparently. And there's all kinds of reasons for these MPOs to come together in lots of different ways, and they have done some things together. They meet jointly, which is one of our extra recommendations, actually, as MPO boards. However, to give you an idea of what's going on there, and don't tell my MPO guy that used to be my employee, is now the director at Campo in Raleigh, this, I told you this, but it's kind of a failure in some ways, because you've got both ends now, the Raleigh end and the Durham-Chapel Hill end, these 2 MPOs, are both pursuing regional transit systems. That's good. The problem is this. The west side is pursuing passenger rail. The east side is looking at enhanced express bus service and BRT. Now, if I'm sitting in the middle, Research Triangle Park, or maybe the airport, I'm going, what is this doing for me? I mean, how do you, right away, you know that you're gonna have to change seats. And if you're a transit operator sitting out here, the minute you change a seat, you lose people, because no one wants to wait for that connection. The connections get screwed up. There's just problems with changing seats on vehicles. So after our regional transit authority was chartered in 1990, and they still haven't gotten a solution. So that makes, you know, regional sense. And so that's I'm slamming on my own region a little bit, but that's the truth. And now, would it have been different if they had joined back when we started talking about it? Maybe, maybe not. We can't rewind history and find that out. But the other thing about these long-term recommendations, and I'll stop here in just a second, is a couple of things. Voting structure. So a couple of things about voting. This is where everybody gets kind of crazy. Because this is where the local versus regional thing, everybody just starts going bonkers, and we had people in Pasco yesterday saying we need to have equal representation with Pinellas and Hillsborough, and it doesn't matter what the population is. Well, that's awesome. But I'm not sure everybody would agree with that. When it was approached to me when I was the Raleigh MPO director, I didn't like that either, because we had a lot more people than guys on the west side. You're telling me half my population is going to get their vote cut in half? I don't think that's going to happen. I can't bring that to my board. So we have a recommendation, believe it or not, we maybe against our own common better judgment, we do have at least a springboard for a type of voting arrangement that we found that could help at least get the discussion more detailed. And it revolves around a two-pronged kind of approval system, but read about that. Voting is important. So what voting is, it doesn't really matter. 98% of the time, all the votes in MPO boards are unanimous. And we have done enough work, Jeff and I, around the country before the study ever happened to know that that's true. And so, but people always gravitate towards, well, what about the one thing where we don't agree? And they'll spend 99% of their time arguing about that. But the reality is 98% of the time, it doesn't matter. Another thing we found is regional trust. And so work on the things like in the top group here that you can do, and do those. And through that, you will evolve a much better system than you have now, just from the process of going through it, whether or not you even actually accomplish it. So some people will be perturbed that, you know, the joint MPO thing isn't happening until later, but, you know, take heart. At least in the early recommendations, we are calling for this TMA leadership group to step forward and assume the mantle of being the caretaker of regional projects while the MPOs continue to do their business as they are now, by and large. I will simply hit on the schedule one more time. This is us right now, January 15th through the 18th. The draft report's out. We will take comments from this series of meetings that we're getting this week. We will provide a direct response in the next version of the draft and make some edits as appropriate. And then in February, first week of February, we'll release the second edition of the draft. And from that point forward, I don't anticipate a lot of edits coming from us. The great thing about this was that, you know, the TBARTA client manager laid off me, laid off Jeff. They didn't direct this study. I've been accused of being a tool of FDOT. I've been accused of being this or that. I can assure you, whether you believe me or not, these are our recommendations. This is what we heard. This is from all the input we got from the MPO people here, from the peer studies, from the workshops, and this is where it landed. There are some things you'll like, there are some things you don't care about, and there's some things you're going, no. But that's okay. When we've done things like this in the past, and I want to throw this out there and I'll be quiet, in Hampton Roads, Virginia, Charlotte, I guess Raleigh, and you did one for, was it Broward? Thank you. What's typically happened is they don't adopt everything in the report. Well, that's ridiculous. Who's going to do that? But they do take things from it and build from it, and there are significant changes get made. And that's been the experience that I've had with the work like this that I've done. So take heart. You may not get everything, but there will be some improvements from this if the tradition holds a little bit. The final thing I'll say, when I landed on Tuesday at the airport on the other side of the bay, I got a map. I don't know why they still do this. Does anybody still use these maps? But they still do it. A rental car company, Enterprise, I think, gave me this map. And this is the map. Other side is totally useless map of Florida, or part of Florida. Panhandle, just, you know, who cares, man. But anyway, this is the map that they gave me. Well, what's this map show? And this is enterprise. They don't really care about regional whatever. I mean, they're not in this fight, right? They're just trying to rent cars, man. They don't care. But what is that area? Is that just Hillsborough, where I landed on my plane? Was that just Pinellas? Was it just Pasco? No, that was the region. These people know where their customers are going. So I will leave you with that, at least food for thought. And I guess we'll just take some questions and stuff, or dodge rocks.
Yeah, so this is an introduction to the recommendations, and I guess what I'd like to do is have questions for Scott or for Jeff or for me about what we do with these recommendations. And I just kind of want to reemphasize the main recommendation in the short term is to strengthen the authority of the TMA leadership group, which is right now 3 representatives from the 3 MPOs who get together to recommend regional priorities back to the MPOs, who then have to vote on those regional priorities. And what we're actually suggesting with this is to turn that on its head and let all 3 MPOs recommend their regional priorities, and then have the TMA leadership group vote on and be the owner and decider of what those regional priorities are, so that the Speaker of the House or the state legislature or Representative Sprouse or somebody like that has one person to go to who is the chair of the TMA leadership group for a year, or the staff director who represents that chair for that year, to say, what are Tampa Bay's regional transportation priorities? We don't really have that now. So I think that's a significant short-term recommendation. We do have the issue of Pasco only wanting equal representation and Hillsborough insisting on representation by population. But I think there's a workaround, because think about who's on the Hillsborough MPO board. They have Port Tampa Bay, the Tampa Hillsborough Expressway Authority, they have the Aviation Authority, and they're all regional entities. So if their representatives are weighted with more votes, but say 3 of those are regional entities, they're going to think regionally. So that may not be a bad thing from our perspective to have maybe 5 votes if 2 of them are the Port and the Aviation Authority. So are there questions for Scott or Jeff generally about recommendations or MPO mechanisms? I know this is the most exciting topic at all. You know, nobody's ever heard about this.
Were you being facetious, or is it actually? Okay.
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, if there are questions, come on up, but if there aren't, you've got those recommendations. We've got a few weeks before we finalize a report. Our next TMA leadership group meeting is February 8th, and we will be having this topic of these recommendations taken up at that time. And certainly we'll be bringing this back to the Ford Pinellas Board and the Pinellas County Commission. When it comes to deciding whether we merge MPOs, it's going to be a decision of the Pinellas County Commission and the City of St. Petersburg, because it goes with the largest city and the largest proportion of your population, and that's the County Commission and the City of St. Petersburg. In Tampa, it'll be the City of Tampa and the Hillsborough County Commission. So this is not a decision that can be directed by the state legislature. It's not a decision that can even be dictated by the governor, although the governor and the local communities have to agree. So it's a delicate dance, and you know, I really want to thank these guys. I think they did great work. They did a lot of good research, and they navigated a lot of minefields in the process.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, jump in.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to this, whatever you think of the suggestions here, and however long it's taken us to get to this point, you should all feel pretty good about yourselves. You're the only area in the country who's gone this far in having this conversation. MPOs were created following the 1973 Federal Highway Act, and since that time, there has been one MPO merger in the country. In Hampton Roads in the 1980s, there have been a couple of minor changes in Connecticut that we wouldn't even want to talk about. So there are a lot of MPOs that are actually in your situation that were created separately in the 70s, and now they find themselves, you know, in 2019, very close to their neighbor that they weren't particularly close to when they were first formed. And they're having these conversations, and but you've gone this far. So you should feel pretty good, I think, about having this conversation regardless of where it goes. You're ahead of the curve on that. And I would also suggest that that this study is really, although it feels like this conversation's been going on for a long time, I would like to think of this as kind of a reboot of the conversation, and that once it's done, once the final recommendations are submitted, it is then ball in your court, and that conversation continues under its own momentum by the leadership that you provide.
Last call for any questions. Okay. Oh, yes, we have one. Rick?
I was wondering, the merger, did you ever come across issues with inconsistencies of internal workings of the different MPOs that had to be straightened out in order to merge and operate efficiently?
Well, like I said, there's only been one since 1973.
Right.
I think what they, first of all, and they can jump in, is everybody adapts, everybody evolves. So I think all of these larger regional MPOs with multi-jurisdictions, I mean, think of the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, or the Salt Lake City region, or wherever. There's 9 counties in the San Francisco MPO. They all have evolved their processes to accommodate changes in their counties and in their cities. We have a land use planning component with our MPO. That's not the case in Pasco or Hillsborough. We have 24 cities. That's not the case in the others. I gotta believe we can come up with a mechanism to reconcile some of those differences at the regional scale and figure out how to make it work. But we're gonna all have to adapt.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's true that there's not been, a lot of mergers or hardly any, but there's been significant structural changes on a number of MPOs. I think West Palm is going to an independent MPO structure. Is that right?
That's right. Right.
So that's pretty important. That's a kind of a big deal. You're changing your house. Nashville, one of our peers, was going through it right when we were talking to them. So soon that the phone systems weren't quite up and running, and it had to work around that. Right. But a guy there, Michael Skipper, who's the Whit of Nashville, only not nearly as good or smart, is a great guy. But he, and he was really supportive of that change, which really went from the city of Nashville being the home of the MPO thing to what you would recognize as I guess a regional planning council, RPC. So they call it something different, but that change was right underway. And again, pretty significant structural change. And along with that, there are certainly a lot of refinements to board structure. So change certainly can happen. And at least in this first 5 or 6 year period that we looked at for our recommendations, I don't think any of those are so wild and crazy that I can't foresee them or something like them or of that same kind of caliber happening. And then once you get a regional, body that can authoritatively speak to regional projects, even if you still have to get the MPOs to sign off on it, that's resolving a fair number of the issues. It's not all of them, but it's a pretty good step in the direction, and still allowing the MPOs to focus on, their current jurisdictions the way they probably feel like they should now. So.
Yeah, and I would add, these do take time. I did a very similar project for the MPO in Broward County, which at the time was wholly staffed and within the county structure, Broward County structure. But as you know, they're very similar to you. They have many municipalities. And ultimately, my conclusion was that they should become an independent agency, separate from the county, in order to get over some of the perceived biases in their structure. And they didn't do it right away. The year after I completed the project, they hired their own attorney instead of using the county attorney. They are now fully independent, freestanding agency, separated from the county with a due structure to pay for it, and it took about 10 years. So that's probably not what all of you will want to hear, but it takes time, and the momentum started from that study and built over time. So eventually they got where they wanted. You will too.
I have two questions. One, I wanted to your point about linking land use with transportation, one of the things I appreciate in Pinellas is that's clearly linked. Are those conversations starting to happen in Hillsborough and Pasco, that it would be more clearly linked such that if we were to merge, that linkage stays across the region?
Why don't you guys answer that first?
I don't.
Well, let me just say, the Hillsborough MPO is staffed from their planning commission. And that is the same staff that does the transportation element for the comprehensive plans in the unincorporated county in all 3 cities. And Pasco County's staff is county staff. It's the transportation planning staff. So from that perspective, in all 3 of your areas, they have separate boards. But the staff is very integrated into the land use decision-making process in all 3 areas, and they recognize the importance of doing that. So I think moving forward, probably not as much in the short-term recommendations, but certainly in our long-term recommendations, among the recommendations we have is you all probably need to have a bigger conversation than just about transportation. Because a lot of the successes that we see in some of the peer regions is not as a result of there being an MPO, but as a result of there being a larger agency that deals with economic development, stormwater management, planning, land use planning, transportation planning. Many of them are in councils of government. And so they end up having synergies that we're incapable of having. Here we have, staffs of ranging from, I think Pasco is like 5 or 6 people, up to about, I think it's 17 or 16 in Hillsborough County. We're talking about North Central Texas COG that covers Dallas-Fort Worth. This is an enormous staff. One of the examples that Scott just had is the Nashville MPO is now part of the RPC equivalent there, and a much larger staff, and they're able to specialize more than your staff is capable of doing. So they have somebody whose full-time job is focused on equity planning. That's all they focus on, social equity. But that person, that staff person focuses on social equity in land use, in stormwater management, in transportation, in everything that the whole agency covers. So they're able to achieve some economies of scale and develop some staff specialization that you're not capable of when you have a staff of 15. They do a great job, it's just a different animal entirely. And that would require a much bigger conversation than what about regional transportation discussion.
I think that springboards into another recommendation that we had, or at least a concept that we had in that second tier recommendations, is that you've got regional entities here doing economic planning and development. You've got T-BARTA doing regional stuff. You heard the list up here, it was early on in this meeting, but what would happen, if you did something like, a little bit more like what I guess Metro Council in Minneapolis-St. Paul was one of their peers. I'm not saying you immediately jump on this, but they actually do utility planning, and their land use planning is pretty robust. And so when they issue a plan, that plan isn't just transportation, it's linking where utility lines are going, which, as many of you know, it's a big driver on what kind of development and how fast it comes, as well as some ideas, at least, of land use, and they help local jurisdictions with that question a lot more, maybe. So some of these issues you're getting into, and this will happen more and more frequently, aren't happening here. They're happening nearby here. And once that gets some momentum over the next few years, I think this discussion will certainly continue to get a lot more interest. But a recommendation, too, is maybe you need to look at partners like the RPC, like T-BARTA, like economic development, to increase the importance and the meaning of regional planning. Because these issues that you're facing now, it's going to be harder and harder to address them just locally.
And the other question I had, I think at one of the workshops, we had a presentation from, I believe it was Sandag, that had a concept with a bicameral kind of body that would kind of help reconcile the population, that representation issue that we're struggling with. So are there any recommendations in yours, either long-term or short-term, that would suggest that that kind of body might be appropriate for a merged MPO or some other kind of body around here?
We're actually talking about that now for the TMA leadership group today, which would be to have a majority vote based on population, but then for any action to actually be carried out, 2 of the 3 MPOs have to agree. So it then comes down to 1 vote per MPO. So if Hillsborough had the majority and got maybe 1 more Pinellas person to join them, but Pinellas didn't really support it overall, and neither did Pasco, it wouldn't go forward. So that's kind of what you're talking about, and that's what we've suggested. And Pasco seems actually supportive of that idea, and that might be a way to sort of still have the weighted vote by population, but then, you know, do no harm, right, if the other 2 object. And that could be a good way to manage that a little bit. Yeah. Okay, what I'd like to do now, thank you both. We have 1 more question from Bill Johnson back there, maybe 2 more. Okay.
Thank you. The thing that I have sort of missed in this conversation is this has all been assuming that you have 1 funding source that's coming and being allocated to the region. How do you manage, or how do other regions manage, where they have multiple funding sources coming from, some from local governments, maybe local cities, some coming from local counties, some coming from some kind of state, and merging all of that into a soup that is appropriate?
I'm going to start, and you guys can jump in. You know, I don't think there's ever any one right mechanism based on the funding sources. So there's state and there's federal funds that flow to MPOs. Primarily, it's federal, but there are some state funds too. But every region's different, and they all have to cobble together these individual funding sources from city or county to make a project happen. And as I said earlier today, this morning in my presentation, you need local match to make almost anything happen. So wherever those funding sources come through, what the MPO becomes is the decision-making body, the conduit for those deals to get put together. And it, just like we did for our Gateway Expressway toll road that's under construction today, we contributed significant penny for Pinellas money for a project that's being built by the state of Florida using strategic intermodal system dollars that's going to be a toll road. You know, so you're creating a framework for decision-making, not necessarily a forum for revenue streams.
Yeah, I can't add a whole lot to that. I would give you an example. People like to talk about the Sunrail in Orlando as an example of, you know, oh gee, if we were a 3-county MPO, we'd be able to do it like they did. And you're like, you know, no. MetroPlan really had a fairly limited role and provided no funding to that process. They acted as a forum for the discussion. And I'd also remind you that there's an MPO, River to Sea MPO, that covers Volusia County, and they're an equal player in that. So that was 2 MPOs working together to create a forum for the discussion. But the funding partners are the 3 counties in the city of Orlando, along with DOT. So the importance you have for trying to marshal and coordinate the various funding streams, all of which in that case are coming from a variety of sources, the MPO role in that is to provide the forum for the discussion.
And 1 more question from John. And John is vice chair of our Citizens Advisory Committee, by the way.
Portland, Oregon directly elects their commissioners. They don't rely on, kind of like we directly elect our school board. We don't rely on, you know, mayors and county commissioners being appointed to seats. What do you think of that?
Actually, it's an interesting structure, but one that doesn't comply with federal rules for an MPO. So one thing that they don't tell you about is that they have a subgroup, a sub-board that is comprised of mayors and elected officials, both from the Portland, Oregon area and also the Vancouver, Washington area, because they're 1 urbanized area and 2 MPOs on either side of the Columbia River. And that body and the Metro Board have to agree in order for something to be a federally approved MPO decision. Because the direct election, which, by the way, I think is a great idea, does not comply with federal rules. And
Okay.
it's and it's unique. It's the only area I think that has that kind of board. But you could do it if you had an MPO in a broader agency. You could try to work out something like that.
There's no two MPOs alike anywhere. David?
This question is probably based on my lack of knowledge of the TMA leadership group. But you mentioned as an immediate next step, the idea of strengthening the authority of the TMA. In my experience, serving on the board of a regional MPO, I know there were more agencies represented on the board than just the localities. There were transit companies, regional transit authority, expressway authorities, airport authorities,
Right.
the court. So if there's going to be some suggested strengthening of the TMA leadership group, would there also be consideration of a wider representation of these other agencies, also with voting rights?
That's in their recommendation for strengthening the TMA, would be to put the Aviation Authority, Port Tampa Bay on that voting board. And they've also recommended that those could be advisors on the Ford Pinellas board or the Pasco board, because think about it, we all use those services. We all depend on freight coming in and out of Port Tampa Bay. So that's and even Tampa Hillsborough Expressway Authority is starting to have some conversations here in Pinellas County about maybe there's a role for them to play. So all those things, I think, lead to that kind of structure. Makes sense.
I'd also recommend the handout is kind of the Cliff Notes version. And if you go to the T-BARTA website, the draft recommendations are out there, and they're in paragraph form. They have more detail.
It's really great reading.
See, there it is again.
Y'all did good on the report, but.
I heard that.
So I'm going to ask our chair, Dave Eggers, to come up and just send some concluding remarks, and we're going to get out of here a few minutes before schedule. But I just want to thank you all. You've been fantastic. I think the level of discourse, the conversations has been very positive, and there's a lot that we can take away and will take away from this conversation. So I just want to say thanks. David?
Thank you. That's kind of where I was going to start. Thank you all for coming out today. This has really been good, and I think every time we get together like this, we get some really innovative ideas. What struck me today was, we kind of came in here with a kind of a methodical approach to analyzing what we're really looking for in this area, defining that, kind of having a plan put together about our vision, and I'm not sure that that's there yet. I mentioned that earlier, but nonetheless, that we go through and exhaust all of our financial possibilities now before we jumped into a referendum. So I had that kind of thing in mind as we were coming into today, and then I heard the comment about going to a referendum this November. So I think we'll leave that up, since the mayor of St. Petersburg is gone and he said it, he'll be in charge leading the way. I'm kidding. I certainly understand the passion, the drive to do that. I would just, from my perspective, I would caution that, I don't really want to go back again a second time and not win. And I think we've got to be careful about doing it too quickly and too soon, especially if we haven't done the homework that I think our residents are going to require. And from my perspective, the only thing I would maybe think about, since they threw out a referendum this year, I can throw this out, but we had a lot of groups here today that have strong financial people, they have strong planning people, we have strong technical people, we have strong marketing people. I'm looking at some of them in this room, that those groups separately could discuss some ideas and thoughts to make our plan better, to make our vision stronger and better for our residents to get their hands around. And they could bring that back as a working group to our MPO, for one, to talk about where we could go with this. I mean, really get into how do we engage our residents to vote yes on whatever we decide to do. I suspect that at the end of it, I think Hillsborough, I may not be exactly right, but I think half of their penny is going for transportation infrastructure projects and the other half for transit. We've already got a penny for Pinellas that does a lot of infrastructure work. So maybe we're only talking about a half a penny. I don't know. But again, to PSTA, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 million, which one do we take and which one do we like, and what kind of funding do we need for that? So I think there's still a lot of work to be done, and I think we can get that done. We've got some really talented staff people here, and I think we still have a lot of opportunities to explore. So that kind of struck me as move now versus a little bit more deliberative approach. I know we have different philosophical feelings about it. I think we should do it in an election year. Some think we should do it in an off-election year. But nonetheless, that's something that we can discuss more. And the regional conversation that we had here was just, it was fascinating. It was interesting to hear that 65% of the people said that they supported a regional tax?
Dues paying structure.
A dues paying structure. Okay, good.
Which fund the operations of the
Okay, I thought I was having a heart palpitation there. Okay, I would have been surprised at that number. But nonetheless, I think there is that balance between working from the inside out, strengthening what we have locally before we do it elsewhere. But at the same time, I really do think that this community can be greater as a whole than the sum of its parts. And to do that, we have to look beyond our boundaries and look how it makes sense with our Pasco neighbors and our Hillsborough neighbors. And I was glad to hear that Hillsborough had more good, positive conversation about strengthening TMA instead of eliminating the TMA. So that was nice to hear. But anyway, those are just some random thoughts, and really can't thank you enough for being here. We've got a lot of work to do. I'm glad you all are so engaged in this really important topic. It really is critical, and we are at the right time, at the right place, with the right people, I think, to do some really powerful things. So again, thank you each for your time. It's really valuable, and we know that. So we try to do a good job when we get you all together, because we know how valuable your time is. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much,
Have a great weekend.